this is the first official Symbolic the Gathering. I'll tell you a little bit about the site. The site's called Symbolism Happens, and that terminology comes from the Facebook Symbolic the Zombie Invasion group. The guy that started it, I think he coined it, and then Jonathan took it and ran with it. Jonathan Peugeot, and I loved it so much, I emailed him and I asked him, can I use it for a YouTube? And he gave me permission. I was so excited. And then I emailed his brother and I said, can I use the logo from the book?
Yeah.
And he was like, no one ever asked me to use the images, but because you asked me, I'm going to let you do it. Because everybody's just using it. You know, they don't get
That's
it.
great.
But he said, because I asked him, he gives me full permission to use it. So that's why I have it all over. And it kind of keeps with the brand. I love it. It's awesome.
That's great.
And the goal of the channel, I want the channel to be the gargoyle, the peripheral. You know what I mean? Like the connection between the new people coming in, and also kind of like we're kind of like the holy fools. We're the crazy ones, because you know the center. You know, the center I see kind of like the Peugeot brothers, Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, you know, Paul, all of them. They're like the center, and I like to be on. I'm always been on the peripheral. I'm a liminal character in my life. I've always been. I've been in church, in my family, and even here it's like and I love that position because you can do anything, you know.
Yeah.
So the goal, we've been doing interviews, but I want to do more for artists and more, you know, I want to show. We've been talking about symbolic for so long. I want to actually show people manifesting. It's time. It's been like 6 years, and we're all like symbolic constipated, and we got to get it out. So let's start with a little intro with each one. We'll start with Adam.
Sure. So my name is actually, it's funny. My name is spelled Adam Simon. It's pronounced Autumn Simone, and Autumn is a sort of vaguely Germanic, Hebraic pronunciation of Adam, which is, of course, a character central to our whole gang over here. And I don't know, Simone is like a strange Spanish, the Filipino pronunciation of Simon. But I'm a filmmaker by trade and by education and by practice right now. I've spent some time working in technology. My primary my primary skill is writing, but I also translate that into directing. I do some painting, visual art as well.
Awesome.
And I'm happy to be here. I've been, engrossed by symbolism and narrative basically my whole life. And I think I've come around recently to the fact that I need to establish some sort of conscious explicated community around that, not just within the arts. I'm around other storytellers and whatnot, but people very, very consciously and explicitly discussing this stuff and recognizing it as a foundational substrate of reality and ontology. So I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, brother.
Cool.
Thank you.
Go ahead, brother.
So my name is Brian Kahn. I'm also a filmmaker. I live and work in Atlanta, Georgia, and I work in the film business as a lighting technician, as a cinematographer. Really doing a lot of the nitty-gritty technical things of filmmaking are kind of my trade by day, and it's mostly in the commercial industrial space. I also work for churches as well in the city, like several of them.
Awesome.
So a lot of times those are interviews and things like that, and sometimes they'll have the odd Christmas or Easter kind of special as well. That working freelance instead of in the unions, like everybody kind of knows, there's a lot more film production in Georgia than in years past, and we've definitely kind of been. I'm from Georgia, so it was kind of like a surprising thing that I could just stay in my own town. But I don't work on the big films just because it gives me a lot more time to work on my own things and to kind of have, as Adam was saying before we started, just you spend a lot of time writing that is just very, you need lots of unconstructed hours of thinking and that sort of thing. So working freelance has been kind of the best way to go about that. And yeah, I mean, with respect to Symbolic World and everything, I think it flowed from a similar place, I would say, of wanting to find community of people that are really thinking about what this is all about in a much deeper way. I had have an interest in Christian apologetics as well, but definitely I've kind of seen the limitations of that as an approach to talking to people, and it's not that I'd say it had been helpful for me in my own personal journey, but less. I did not find it necessarily convincing or speaking to the real ways that society was going so much. So I still kind of participate to some degree locally in that kind of dialogue, but just discovering really Jonathan and Paul Vanderklay, really much a revelation of thinking this is much more relevant to how I want to communicate, and far more relevant to filmmaking, to what we're doing.
Right.
So how the kind of idea of a nested symbolic structure, it's like absolutely connected to filmmaking. So that's, I would say, kind of has been my way into it.
Awesome. I think the first time I kind of met you was your articles. You did that one on AI, which was fantastic. I love that
Thank
one.
you.
And then you have that new one talking about the simulation and the Matrix that just came out. Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Hopefully, in the future, maybe we can do something on those articles.
Oh, I'd love to. It's been like a pet conversation for me for the last year or so. Is the AI stuff? I started a Substack where I could kind of communicate some of my other ideas as well, because it was again something where you end up not having that many people that around you physically that you can talk to about those sort of things. And when it comes to the AI developments, it was something where it was like, oh man, like you kind of see so many things unfolding and how many different ways that it can go that are kind of frightening for an artist. And I won't, that's this kind of thing right now, which is taking over discussion. So I won't say more about that at the moment. But yeah, it's been like a pet topic for me. I was like, man, I could spend a whole year just writing about the things that are going on like that. So I decided to make a separate space for that and to try to tie that into just creative discussions, like kind of questions of aesthetics. I think aesthetics in the traditional philosophy has gotten really far away from what artists do, and I would like to bridge more of the gaps between that kind of thing. So that's kind of been my interest as well on the Substack. It's definitely trying to bridge some gap between practical filmmaking things and the higher-minded sort of approach. And I've had to say, in the background, I've always kind of felt like I like teaching and explaining, and I hope in the course of life I'll have more chance to do things like that. So the Substack, and I have also on my YouTube channel, which has some of my short films, I also have done a couple videos. I'm kind of experimenting with that format and learning what I want to do with it. But also kind of talking about other general movie trends, like why are there so many sequels? What's the nostalgia culture about? How does that all connect together? So that's all been kind of like little side projects that I do when I've got more time, or kind of between writing things or things like that, just when I want to let my brain think about something other than what I'm currently working on. It's been a nice little outlet.
Cool. What is the Substack called?
The Substack is called Lucid Themes. And I could post it in our little thread here as well.
Cool.
I'll make sure to put it in the video when I put it out.
Thank you.
But it's fantastic. Very good.
Thank you.
Let me see. Patrick!
Sorry, I'm having some
technical difficulty.
issues.
No problem. Take your time. Did you guys see the Hollywood unions? They added an AI. This whole...
Oh, okay. So tell me about that, because I did see you posted an article earlier, and it was just about the IATSE kind of stance on it. And
yeah, they're trying to find guidelines and ways. I haven't really got into it. I just wondered if anybody, we knew it was going to come sooner or later.
Yeah,
it's going to change everything, man. I don't know if you guys have seen what you can do with some of it. I don't think in the story it's going to do much, but I mean visually and making things faster.
Yeah, I have a bit of a spiritual and practical policy with all this stuff. Is and not, I don't think it's an evasive or avoidant way, but I just try not to think about it. Like, I try to just show up and make art. And, you know, I'm a big fan of DALL-E and ChatGPT and all these models, and I am fascinated by them, and I do explore them. And I am a sort of long-term optimist with all this stuff. But, when it comes to the sort of like socio-political near-term, you know, is ChatGPT going to join WGA and all that kind of stuff? I kind of have a don't even bother policy about it. It's just it seems so. Yeah, it just seems kind of moot or not a good investment of my psychic energy.
Right.
This, of course, is not a prescription to anyone, and if that's a topic we want to discuss, I'm definitely will be a present observer. But I thought that was something worth sharing.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me introduce Patrick, and we'll get into even more.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Patrick. Give a little introduction.
Well, I'm a filmmaker based out of Atlanta. And I feel like everyone else is here. I ran into Jonathan at a show, I think, right before COVID hit. And there's something, the way he spoke about the world and patterns and stuff, that just automatically clicked at me. Like, it's some kind of language that I was missing for forever. And so, like, I've been really diving deep into it. So I have some articles and things I've written before, nothing on the symbolic world, but the next thing I'm working on is kind of exploring the connection between feminism and Medusa. But yeah.
That's interesting. By the way, Patrick, I'm also from Atlanta. I'm also a filmmaker. I think you might have missed that part, but that's
boom. Look at that
cool.
connection
As
there.
it happens, we're all filmmakers in this, so it seems like that's kind of following the logo says it, where it seems like we're being so that's pretty cool.
So, Patrick, I don't know, just have you heard of a book called Satanic Feminism?
No.
It's by Oxford University Press. It's a very like thick academic book exploring. I haven't read it in totality. It's very dense, but about the Lucifer as a liberator or as a liberating figure of women. In, I think, beginning in the 19th century, there were some very serious feminist groups really contemplating the figure of Lucifer as a I don't know, as a symbol or tool of liberation. I definitely recommend checking it out. I mean, in the context of Medusa, it sounds relevant.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I have to check that book out. I actually recently read a book. I think I spoke it on the last time I was on one of these with Moses, but I recently read a book called Genesis of Gender by Miguel Pagoli, and she covers a lot of, because she used to be an ex-feminist and converted to Catholicism and kind of talks about gender, but she uses a lot of like Pagolian, I guess, like symbolistic language. The only thing is she backtracked on it. Sometimes it says like, she mentions like, oh, these are metaphors, right? So this whole thing of explaining
Jungian
and stuff, and then she goes, but these are nice metaphors and all, but XYZ. I kind of want to talk to her too. I know she's been on some podcast stuff before, but yeah, I think that might be a good thing to kind of help me fill in some gaps right that I have.
I know I saw, probably you saw this too, but there was one of those, I think it was shared in the Symbolic World Facebook page, but it was the kind of inverted, it was like a digital sculpture. It was like an inverted image with the Medusa holding the Perseus head.
No,
Does anyone remember that?
That's an actual, I believe that's an actual statue in New York City.
Okay.
They released it after the Me Too movement. But what's interesting also is I know there's a bunch of feminist articles around that time too, and maybe a little bit beforehand, that talks about Medusa as, I mean, it's like their patron saint, right? And so they talk about her as a victim, which to a certain extent she is. So like I guess two things I'm kind of working through on that is, one, I've had this kind of thought that, the fact that she looks at people and turns to stone comes to me as kind of like a fetishization of the masculine, right? So she looks at something And I mean, there's an aspect of like there's so much chaos, but she sees everything in like that form of the masculine so much so that she snuffs all life out of him and just sees like the stone of it, right? And I'm wondering, and she herself is a monster, like with snakes for hair. And part of me sometimes wonders, like, if she saw I'm wondering if she saw her own reflection, if that would cure her. Because in the story right now, I mean, it's a pagan story, so like there's a lot of passion and death involved, right? So like, in a way, Medusa has to become a sacrifice in order to like, eventually she's like the monster is used against itself, but Perseus uses her head to turn some huge, I forget what he was called, Andromedon or something, a huge monster to stone in order to save like the princess, right? But I'm wondering if it was like Christianized, you could say, if Medusa would be redeemed, and then later she would come back and then would the help of Perseus like pierce the monster anyway to save beauty or something like that. But she herself was beautiful, which was part of her like a blessing and a curse because it's something that caused her to be violated by Poseidon in the first place. But I mean, there's definitely something there, but I don't know. I feel like I'm missing a couple of chunks there.
Peterson, I don't know if you've heard him talk about Medusa, but this is a much more prosaic interpretation. But her ability to turn men into stone might just indicate that men become self-conscious among in the presence of beautiful women. I mean, I'm sure that interpretations cross your path, but that's always been a very practical and prosaic meaning of the symbol to me. And Peugeot talks about I forget what particular story, or if he's just talking about it more generally, but the young beautiful woman's ability to like knock the cocky guy on his ass, like just with a glance, that's when wielded properly a very virtuous thing, right?
Right.
You want women to humble the out of control or narcissistic masculine spirit at the appropriate time.
Yeah.
So pertaining to a redemption arc for Medusa, that idea strikes me as relevant.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I guess there's two versions of the story. One where Poseidon rapes her, and then there's another one where she seduces him. But I feel like they're both still very, like, the problem is still very similar because it's either way, it's kind of like her beauty at the same time is like you said, there's an aspect of it that's in a way like a blessing, like it can put the cockiness in like a young male or something and put him in his place. But then it's also, I don't know, like Poseidon is like the god of the earth or the waters, right? And so kind of like mastery of, I guess, chaos or something like that. But he forces himself upon her and defiles the temple of Athena, which Athena and Poseidon were, like rivals to a certain extent. And so like Athena's like feminine wisdom, justice, and things like that. But at the end of the day, she doesn't curse Poseidon, she curses Medusa. But then there's that whole thing where she's like Gorgon Sitsu already, right? So like there's 3 of them. 2 of them are immortal, and then Medusa is the 3rd one that's mortal. So that's why she's gonna be killed.
That dichotomy of her beauty rendering her vulnerable and also being her ultimate power, I mean, that just strikes me as baseline symbology, right? Right. Yeah. The duality itself is the symbol, right? It's these 2 opposites meaning. That's what makes it archetypal, I think. So I don't know. It sounds like you're having trouble reconciling these 2 dueling origin stories.
Yeah, I think I'm just also doing the Western thing where I'm thinking of everything a little too idiosyncratic, like putting it all together. So I'm like looking at Poseidon, and I'm looking at Athena, and like Medusa's role within like things, and just like instead of like looking at as a whole, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I just think there's so much depth. There's something about Medusa that just like popped into my life and she won't leave me alone. That's why I've been kind of thinking about it. But in general, I've been kind of like thinking about the feminine in general. I don't know, maybe I grew up in a very like matriarchal household or something, or just had like a lot of women in my life. And so like when I heard Jonathan talk about the feminine and stuff, and I just view, I mean, in general, it seems like we're in the era of the battle of the feminine. I like to some extent, like the masculine has already been toppled and it's gone down to like the next level. And so there's two extremes happening where you see, what's it called, like women identifying as witches or basically being sirens, like on OnlyFans, and like having men giving to their passions and then they like fall into the abyss of the waters, like with no meaning in their life and no meaningful relationship. And then there's the complete opposite, where there's like the traditional women that are basically calling out, where are the men, right? But yeah, I mean, I feel like there's something to that, and I feel like Medusa is connected in some way, especially since the feminist movement, right, about her as a patron saint, erected a statue of her in the Me Too movement of the image you mentioned earlier, Brian, of her holding the head of Perseus instead of the other way around, like the way the story is told. And then, I mean, that second image that I think Jonathan had, maybe it was a picture only video, but he had another one. They erected another statue of this kind of like the woman that goes in like. But she's kind of Buddha-esque to me too, because I mean, it's just like instead of the snake being on top of her head, it's like kind of always to the bottom. So kind of like an Ursula type character, but to me, it's still kind of like Medusa-esque. So there's something to it that speaks to me.
Well, several thoughts that I had just while you were saying that is the first thing that strikes me is I don't think I've thought about this as much as you have. So, like, my familiarity with this story was really limited to the Perseus story. So I wasn't aware of this other dynamic with her in this relationship with Poseidon. So I'd be curious to hear more about that. But the interesting thing about that is, of course, it's really framed from Perseus' perspective most of the time. So you don't really think about, traditionally, at least in my understanding, you tend not to think about what Medusa's perspective is on the matter, or what her role is. She's more like Adam said, the kind of prosaic interpretation is, well, there's this kind of feminine beauty which disarms and kind of can defeat a male, like regardless of his kind of stature. But then it's like as soon as we kind of enter into this other frame shift, it's like, well, what is Medusa in her own terms? Like that to me is it's a very interesting question. I guess the other things I would want to ask in relation to the Perseus story is, well, what are the other women that are important in that story? So of course there's Andromeda as well. So if there's these other feminine elements in the stories, are they shedding light on a different side of Medusa? Is there some kind of relationship there?
Yeah, I think there is. So just really quick before I forget. Yeah, I think Andromeda is what would happen to Medusa if Poseidon wasn't there. It's like the opposite storyline. So Medusa gets victimized by the masculine, so she's a monster, and then ends up paying the price both by losing her beauty, being turned into a monster, and then paying with her life. And then the opposite side of that is another beautiful woman, but you have more of, I guess you could say, a virtuous masculine coming that saves her from the monster. But it's interesting because Medusa is the one that, in a way, like, she's used again. It's like that whole thing of like Christ defeats death with death, in the same way that Perseus defeats basically death with death. So he shows that giant monster at the head of Medusa, and he turns to stone. And I think after that he gives the head of Medusa back to Athena, where she puts it on her.
That's it. Wow.
But yeah, but I mean, maybe I'm trying to connect too many things within one thing, but I also trying to see like, once again, because it is a pagan story, sometimes I'm curious whether if you did like a Christian version of it, how it would be different, right? And so but maybe I should stop doing that.
well, something interesting is happening there? It sounds to me that maybe your frustration or predicament is coming specifically from you're trying to take a pagan story and fit it into a more Christian ontology or Western framework. So I don't know if you're familiar with Camille Paglia's work, Sexual Personae being her sort of primary tome. Paglia is a sort of second wave pro-sex feminist who rejected the third wave of feminism. And her central thesis in Sexual Personae, which was like David Bowie's favorite book, is it's something like nature always wins. So she refers to a sort of pre-Christian pagan feminine ethos, the Chthonic or the Chthonian, which is contra the Olympian gods, right? There were the Chthonic, the gods of the earth, and the Olympian sky gods. So she proposes this cosmology of sky god, or sky cult and earth cult. And the Chthonian refers not to just like the feminine earth, material source cosmology, but the Chthonic refers to this sort of proto-feminine. It's like, it's this detritus and God, I wish she's so poetic and lyrical, and which is great, but also makes the book hard to read and hard to translate. But she refers to this like pre-primordial soup, and she says that nature always wins, and so she conceptualizes ancient Greece and also ancient Egypt as these attempts to ultimately triumph over the Chthonian. And the character of Athena is very interesting because she's this hyper-masculine female. Like she's cycle, right? She's the transcendent female. So she's Apollonian in a sense. And that's actually a strange inversion, right? And so Paglia actually considers these attempts to, I don't know if masculinize is the word, but to extract the female essence and somehow keep her in the heavenly domain. That's the ultimate rebellion against the earth, right? It's to take that precious seed of creation and lift it up or elevate it so high that it loses its material basis. And she actually associates that with the decadent or ending periods of civilization. And so a few things come to mind here, and interrupt me at any point. But this sort of radical wave of feminism that we're encountering now is this. It's a big thing. It's kind of a boogeyman term, but we have these women adopting hyper-masculine roles, right? And that's sort of the Athenian. Like Athena, if your thing is the bow, or is that that's
Artemis.
Yeah, that's Artemis. But they're both part of that same canon of trying to elevate the feminine so high up that it becomes Apollonian. And Paglia basically suggests that when you see that happening, that's when things start breaking down. When you see that androgyny emerge, that's when things start breaking down. So when I think about the returning of the head of Medusa to Athena, it's like returning her some of that more primordial wild woman power. And that's a restoration of balance. I'm speculating here because I'm not deeply, you're probably much more familiar with the myths than I am. But that all comes to mind, and Paglia is very critical, or not critical, but she points out, Christianity creating, deciding that God was male. That's the ultimate insight of Christianity, and it's the ultimate rebellion against the chthonic ground of earth. So I highly recommend checking out her writing. I don't know if any of this is useful to you, but those are a few ideas that come to mind.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that too, about Athena being basically like one of the few like goddesses that's like more of a heaven and has pretty masculine traits. And then you have the exact opposite, trying to defile her temple. So like the masculine that's a lord of earth, right? And so he's not that heavenly one, he's down below. So his counterpart would be Zeus, because Zeus is the one that's up in heaven, right? So you have this earthly masculine that goes into her temple and to defile it, right? And so because Medusa was a priestess of Athena, And so you have this earthly, like, masculine that goes in purposely to defile it. And then Athena doesn't like curse or, put justice upon Poseidon, but does it on Medusa, like one of her own priestesses, because it's like, it's due to her that the temple was defiled. And you kind of see the same thing sometimes with even certain, like, cases with women sometimes of, a woman can get sexually assaulted or something, and sometimes the immediate question is like, how was she dressed? Like, there's this also aspect of, makes it sound feminist, but it does happen sometimes, especially the more traditional thing of like this whole thing of modesty. Like, was she modest enough? Because if she wasn't, maybe that's why she was, taken advantage of. And so it's that same pattern there. And then that's why, that's where you have the connection. Then the Me Too movement, basically making Medusa the patron saint of their movement, because it's like that same issue or pattern. And then there's this also, like I mentioned, I don't know how the stories connect. I have to actually really go through and kind of read more of the lore to see how they connect. And I don't know if it's like a separate mythos or it's connected with this one. But Medusa is a sister between three, so they're known as the Gorgon sisters. So two of them are already monsters that have. It's explained that they have, like, they kind of sound like harpies, like bronze claws with wings, and they're terrifying. And then two of them are immortal, and Medusa is the only one that's mortal. But Medusa is in the temple of Athena, and her two sisters are like the gods of the end of the world. But when Medusa gets banished, she basically goes and joins her sisters. So I'm wondering if they're, you have that kind of like little trinity there too, of maybe like, I don't know, like the dark trinity of the feminine or something.
The other sisters have any characteristics that are made explicit about them, or are they just the other Gorgons that don't really get defined?
There's like small things that I don't have on top of my head. But it's also hard sometimes to find like actual information, because then you have a lot of like the modernist like interpretation. So you have some guy making YouTube videos about him and stuff like that, and you don't know how much of it he just like, you know what I mean? Like, there's some weird people that create their own interpretation. Yeah. I'm not sure if it's actually part of the lore, if you just like put that in there or something. But yeah,
those Patrick sisters, they sound like fringe, like Bajillion fringe characters as well, right? They're iron and wings, and so. And Medusa's the middle child, or is she? What is the
her
sibling relation?
I just their parents were Forctus and Keto, which both of them were gods of the sea. So they were both hybrid already. One was like a god of monsters of the depths, and the other one's like god of the abyss or something. So you already see kind of like the hybridization, or like the too much potential thing kind of going on there. So it creates, so when they have children, it creates two monsters, or three, I guess you can say. But yeah, I mean, the genealogy, like if you go, the more in-depth genealogy of Medusa, I'm not as familiar with.
Patrick, as a filmmaker, how are you using the myth in your? Are you writing a story about it, or are you using it just as inspiration?
So I do have like a couple of what's it called? Short. I recently shot like a little short film, not based on this, something separate. So I'm trying to make more content in terms of films and stuff. But the reason I'm doing this one, I guess, is I'm trying. I guess I'm trying to do two things. One is like connect this myth within like how it's manifesting in our, like, the world we're experiencing, like the story, right? And so like I mentioned before already, you see the like manifestation of the statues at first, so there's something there. I'm just trying to kind of like just create that connecting point to a certain extent. And then after I do that, I guess I'm trying to see if there's a redemptive quality. Like, I have what's it called? I've just been thinking about whether when you take some of these pagan stories, if there's a way to, I guess you could say, Christianize them, like baptize them or something. So, like, turn it into Christian fairy tale space, like or Christian mythologies. But maybe that's not possible, and that's why the fathers that's just left them the way they are.
That's what actually Taglia's central thesis is: you can't. She says you can't keep the forces of paganism at bay, no matter how hard you try. And so, putting this into the Brilliant ontology, or the I don't know. I see the language of creation back there. Moses.
I love that book.
Which was, what was essential in a biblical cosmology is the seventh day, the Sabbath, the accounting for the fringe. And so, what I think Paglia doesn't get is in a healthy biblical or Judeo-Christian cosmology, you actually create space for those pagan stories, for that pagan energy, and you don't forcibly try to integrate it. You just create a container for it. And so, my hypothesis here, my inkling here is that you can't, you can't really westernize those stories, and that's actually their utility. Like we need this fringe content, we need this pagan content, as a facilitator of change and a space for new ideas to emerge in the culture. So, my hypothesis is that you can't baptize it.
Okay, let me push back a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you see the work of like Lord of the Rings and Narnia, where they took the pagan stories and kind of gave it a Christian center?
I think that's perhaps it's complementary, but I think that's actually the incorrect framing. I think they took Christian stories and cloaked them in paganism. I don't think these were pagan stories made Christian. And I'm not sure who it was. I think it was Peugeot, or somebody was commenting on Lewis and suggested that there were, I'm blanking, I don't think it was Peugeot, but suggesting that there were a couple of reasons why these writers did this, just on a practical front. One was that if they tried to tell these Christian stories in a Christian mythology, the Christianity was actually mainstream enough at the time that it would have upset people to be like writing young adult Christianity.
Right.
And at the same time, maybe the pop cultural masses at the time wouldn't have been able to take it seriously. So on both fronts, it wouldn't be useful. Now, what I think we're seeing today is Christianity is countercultural enough that we can just tell these stories. We can just tell these stories as they are, and we're the I shouldn't speak for all of us, but I'm the person at the fringe. Like when I'm talking about orthodoxy, like I'm the Greek rebel. So to answer your question, I think you can dress up the Christian and the pagan, but maybe not the other way around, something like that.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it that way, maybe like in a sense, like the complete essence of feminism can also not be integrated into Christianity itself, also, like in that same manner of what you're saying, right? Like maybe you can take parts of it, or something, and integrate it, but you can't take. It's almost like the ideologies don't work together enough where it's not possible to integrate it into the
Well, yeah, I think that's certainly the case, and I think that's merit. Like, I don't think that's an exclusionary statement of feminism. It's like that feminine essence represents the chaos and the unknown, and the masculine attempt to make it fully cohesive within the world of order and the system is doomed to fail. So, I think that's the very merit of that feminine essence, of that femininity, is that it's always going to contain that primordial mystery. And the more we try to use masculine principles of order to force it into our our social map, the more it's gonna fight back. And the Kagura's way of saying that is nature always wins.
No, this is really good. That's good to throw ideas with other people that know what you're talking about. I'm just saying though that it's also pretty interesting because it seems like Medusa's story is also the exact inversion to a certain extent of the Theotokos story, Mother Mary, where it's because at the end of the day, Medusa ascends back up into heaven, you can say, on the shield of Athena, in the similar matter that you have the Dormition of Mary, or I'm Catholic, so we have the Ascension of Mary up into heaven, and so you have that pattern there. The only difference is that in Medusa, in a way, herself is the one that's offered, whereas Mary offers the meaning of all meaning, meaning Christ, and like has that sacrifice instead of it being herself. Like she doesn't take his place to a certain extent. But it seems it does not make sense, and I'm making those connections.
Yeah, can you just restate that one more time? So I understand Mary's sacrifice is her son, and you said Medusa's ascension for.
Well, so I'm saying, so if you look at both, so Mary's story is kind of like the Christian tale of the feminine, and then you have Medusa being like the pagan, or I'll just say like the satanic version of the feminine.
Right.
Whereas, so you have Medusa in heaven, she gets banished, and then she's also the one that is, she's sacrificed, right? That Perseus kills her. She's like a there's an scapegoat, and through like this weird inversion of Perseus using to defeat other deaths, she gets put back up into Athena's temple, like you could say their version of heaven, on the shield. Whereas Mary, it's kind of in reverse. So her sacrifices, pregnancy to a certain extent for a woman, it was a curse given to the feminine from God to have to carry out the pregnancy after but it's a blessing at the same time. And so it brings in the Christ into the world, and then it's like through him. So Christ is almost like the opposite of Poseidon, because he sacrifices himself for the good of the world, and also ends up bringing up like his mother gets to ascend into heaven with him after a certain amount of time. I'm kind of humbled because I don't have it all put together.
They sound like actually very complementary stories. In one sense, if you're framing Medusa as the scapegoat, she is a Christ-like figure, right? Like, so she's cast down from heaven, she's violated and raped, she's decapitated, and then she becomes her persecution and murder actually becomes a shield against the monster, right? Much like staring at the stake or staring at the crucifix. That's a false equivalency, but there's some self-similarity there. She ascends and she's a shield. I'm seeing some sort of affinity between Christ and Medusa there. Now, you're suggesting, I think you're trying to make a comparison. Correct me if I misunderstand you. You're trying to make a comparison or contrast the virgin figure with Medusa, and so So the Jung was very enthusiastic about the integration of the Virgin into the tetrad for the Catholics. He thought 4 was a more complete number, and I'm not sure if this is a Jungian idea or I don't know where I got it, but one very generous interpretation of the integration of Mary is that the ultimate sacrifice in the Christ story isn't actually that of Christ. It's that of Mary giving up Christ. And I think you alluded to that slightly. So, that idea is pretty profound. And it seems to me, if it's not orthogonal, it's just a whole nother layer of complexity.
I mentioned that, you're right. In Catholicism in particular, especially Western Catholicism, like Roman Catholics, there's clearly a very big devotion to, the stages of the cross and like the crucifixion of Christ, but there's also the devotion of the sorrowful mother. And so it's part, so she has 7 blades that are in her heart. And then there's an aspect that she was in a way spiritually crucified with Christ. And I know there's this out there where I think it's Christ in the back, and I think Mary's kind of in front of him a little bit.
I'd love to see that image.
There used to be, I think, like crucifixes images with both Mary and Christ on it. But it was that aspect of her spiritually dying at the foot of the cross.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting because one speculation I could make here is that image where maybe something is emerging and emanating simultaneously is an attempt to bond together the feminine and masculine in this redemption story, right? Like they're they're both sacrificial lambs, and perhaps there's some way to unify that that might appease the culture a little more, or might be a little less of a masculine-centric story. So, perhaps you're doing God's work here, trying to sort this out, Patrick. Like
Maybe
because it does sound like an iteration. It sounds to me that integration of Mary into the crucifixion is actually an iteration on the pagan myth. Like it sounds to me that we kind of have this complementary story, the Christ and Medusa's ascension, and then we like try to throw a woman in it. Like it sounds like something's working itself out, and maybe the scent you're following is exactly that.
Also, the snake. I'm thinking of Moses in the desert with the snake on the staff, lifting it up.
That's
interesting.
Yeah, that's the same thing of like Christ defeating death with death, in the sense of like the snakes are defeated with an image of a snake to some extent, like the monster defeats the monster. And so, I mean, it's there in Medusa too, and we mentioned it before, where she's used to defeat and stop the end of the world and from it eating another beautiful woman. But Andromeda is also interesting because the reason they want to kill her is because she's so beautiful.
Right.
That's part of the thing there, which is also why Medusa was victimized too, is because she was so beautiful too. And so maybe that's something that I can go into. Maybe it's about beauty and
Yeah, I have to say, I empathize with your project a lot. I think getting back to the earlier point of, can this story be Christianized? I feel like my intuition is similar to Adam's, that maybe there's a difficulty to like fully complete that task in some way. But I can understand why you would be interested in this, because if you think about this, as you said, as kind of maybe the guiding spirit, so to speak, for modern feminism. And then you're looking at that trajectory, you say, okay, that's not a good trajectory. So then it's like, well, what's a better
story?
What's a better story? How does the story end? Or how do you follow that to its completion? And then that ends up having this redemptive role in this relationship to Athena. So it's like, well, then maybe there's a possibility of feminism looking more to, again, for us, we want to say, well, we would want that to be, the Theotokos to be Mary, but within the pagan framework, at least, within the framework of that story, it's like, well, at least Athena then is maybe a better model. Now, I know earlier there was some with the Pagalian model, you're saying that's already an error to do that as well. So it's like within what we've kind of laid out here, it's like there's almost no escape then between two extremes in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm starting to think maybe it's not. I mean, I think the only way it'd be possible is basically do a complete retelling, but then you're just rewriting something in scripture, basically.
Well, I don't know. My hope is that you're following the scent of some emergent new story. And I mean, I think this is the work of aesthetics. This is the work of the artist to give flesh to the theory. So if I'm going to give like a generous interpretation, and I'm actually not that familiar with the Medusa myth. I mean, it's deep in my subcortical structure somewhere, but as we're talking about it, it's refreshing things. But I see in the Perseus version of the story, what you have is the earthly tyrannical power of beauty being wielded by a masculine principle to protect the positive emanation, the positive form of beauty from the giant in the service of a higher feminine principle. I mean, to me, that's a very beautiful and cohesive story. Now, I think what we're prone to do in popular culture, and what feminism is prone to do, is just like solely identify with Medusa, like solely identify with Athena, and think like we need to worship this. The thing that's actually worthy of worship is this is what I'm smelling, is the thing that's actually worthy of worship is the meaning of this story in its totality. That there's actually a collaboration. What's happening there is a collaboration of Perseus with Athena to like save the world by wielding a negative aspect of the feminine in service of a positive aspect of the feminine. So to me, that story is actually complete, and I think I'm more generous to these stories and a little less cynical than Paglia in general. Like Paglia thinks we're all fucking doomed. So I don't know, and just maybe that's a worthwhile exercise, just like trying to give the most virtuous and integrated and generous interpretation of the story, integrating all the characters. Because it does seem complete unto itself when I frame it like that, and perhaps I'm just like utterly wrong or lost in the symbolic drink.
Well, another mention. I don't want to hijack this conversation about Medusa too much, but
you started it.
There's another thing where after Hera gets cut off, she gives birth to two beings. One being Pegasus, which is the horse with wings. And the second is, I forget what his name is, but he's basically like this warlike boar that has like two scythes or two swords or something like that. And Perseus actually uses Pegasus also to get to Andromeda, right? And so like, I know that something like a mounted rider is I think Matteo talked about this is kind of like, it's similar to a garment skin to some extent because it increases your capacity to run faster, and you also have slightly higher, so you see a little farther out, right? And so Pegasus being a horse with wings is kind of like almost like a virtue or like a grace or a gift he's received from conquering Medusa. But once again, there's like this mystery where it's not completely good because then it creates like this warlike being on the other end of the spectrum too. Like that's the two that she gives birth to.
So sorry to interrupt, but just for clarification, when that happens after Perseus turns her to stone with the shield, like she gives birth, how does that happen in the story?
Yeah, so the way he destroys Medusa is he hides and looks at her through the shield, and then he sees that she's asleep, so he goes and cuts off her head. And then from the blood that flows from like her neck is birthed Pegasus and the other being. They're also obviously Poseidon's also, because I mean she gives birth to Poseidon is the father, like who gives those identities. And so
that's fascinating.
That's so awesome. It's so complicated.
It's amazing.
It's a PhD thesis about that, right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that jumps out is like, okay, so he cuts off her head, and then the identity splits, and one is even lower than Medusa, which is this warlike war creature, and then one is a higher identity, which is this Pegasus. So it's like one level goes up, and then one level goes down in some way. I don't know exactly what that means.
Cain and Abel.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a further, to some extent, it's like another step of the fall.
Right.
Like same thing, like Genesis is constantly falling farther and farther from the garden, and so to some extent, it's a similar thing where there's the constant splitting.
Right. We have like the fractal universe. Everything has a heaven and earth, no matter how low it is, how high it is. So no matter how low she is. She was cut. Her heaven and earth split, and you're right. It's a continuing of the fall.
Yeah.
What happens to the board? Oh, go on. Right?
I was going to say that just makes you think of like the Tiamat, the idea of Marduk splitting the heavens with and making the earth out of the body of Tiamat. It just kind of that seems to align with that, but I don't have anywhere further. But I was going to go with that.
I don't think there's much written honestly about the poor guy. I think he has like a very small story that, but I didn't pay much attention to it because there's not much about it. I'm pretty sure he falls in battle or something, but I might be wrong.
Is there not a version, or is this just a Hollywood thing where it's that Medusa actually sees herself in the shield and she turns to stone? Is that?
From what I've seen, no. Which is why, because this is the other thing I was thinking about, is because at some in Revelation, I think Joe kind of talks about too, is when the New Jerusalem comes, like the water is crystallized, right? It perfectly reflects itself. So in some sense, like that's what Christ does too. Like when we look at Him, we see our most perfect selves, like our ideal selves, right? So I'm wondering because in a sense, Medusa herself is like almost too much potential or so much chaos that it, like a question you can't answer, and that's why we turn people to stone. But if she saw herself in the mirror, it would give her an identity, and I don't know if cure is used the right word, but kind of like redeem her. And then she herself would almost become a fusion of the two that it was born from. So maybe like Pegasus and then the other warlike character would come together in her in some way. And I don't know, like, and then and that would be like, and she would have like a sense of redemption. That's why I was asking earlier, like I'm wondering if there was a way to Christianize the story. I'm wondering if that was it. Like,
Yeah, seems like the only way is to save her, to get her to repent and climb up the mountain.
Yeah, like look what you become, and it's the heavenly master that shows you.
I love that.
You're like, look, this is who you become, right? That's why I'm saying, like, the pagan story is like there needs to be like it's about passion and sacrifice. There always needs to be a scapegoat, right? So in the pagan story, the masculine has to kill her, whereas like. In the Christian story, I'm wondering if it's like, look at what you've become. Like, become redeemed, in a sense, right?
I love that. I mean, I think that's such an interesting story to explore and iterate on. It's like, look at what you become, bitch. Like, that's the word I hear. You're gonna have to. So, from the research I've done, I haven't seen a story where Medusa actually sees her own reflection. The story goes that Percy is kind of like hiding from her, and he just sees her like reflection out in the distance, and he waits for her to fall asleep. And when she falls asleep, that's when he kills her. And so there's another thing in that in itself, right? Like when Adam falls asleep, God splits him into Adam and Eve, and then when she falls asleep, she gets cut. And also split into you have Pegasus and the other guy. So I mean, there's so much. Some things get a little overwhelming, and then trying to write something about it is just you're kind of caught up in it. I mean, it's like thinking about it is like coming across Medusa itself, where you just like kind of freeze. Well, I think it's a courageous thing to explore. I mean, it's a fascinating idea. What happens when the abyss stares into itself?
Yeah. The resurrection?
yeah.
Wow. I'd love to hear, Patrick, what else. I know you said you've been doing some shorts and want to do more. Like, what, more on a practical film perspective, like, what type of films are you trying to make? Like, what genre, what sort of, how are you trying to, because I think this is probably a problem for all of us, is bringing down any of these things to the level of what we're actually working on in some way.
And the budget.
Yeah.
Having the money.
I'm taking it step by step. So I'm starting off with something like simple, and then I'm going to see if I can like improve my skill set to just become better at it. But I mean, the first film I just shot was basically this it's essentially a story of a woman that kind of like, it's that her father passed away and he inherits his house. But she was like the type of woman, the career woman, right? And so she has no family, like no friends, and now she's left to take care of the house. But she has no one to talk to. So she calls a customer service agent to talk through this. But like that isn't revealed till the end. Like I play off the movie where she's on the phone, kind of like venting, complaining to somebody, and then it's also slightly revealed that her father passed away, and then. It's kind of, I haven't hinted at that her father was like a religious person that prayed the rosary and things like that. And so she's coming to terms with why, like, cause she is like falling away from the faith. But at the end of it, I basically have her, trying to, I have like a line where her one advice from her dad was like, you're not going to get it until you pray. But at the same time, I have her, I want, I don't know, just like, I want her phone call herself to come off as a prayer too. And so she starts off with like almost like this earthly prayer to somebody else out of complete loneliness and works her way up to that. But it's like I know it sounds complex, but I haven't played out in a very just short amount of time. And then the next one I want to film is basically a hero. Also, I think it'll be no longer than 2-3 minutes of like a hero that's exiled. So he's kind of like walking away from what he can see is like trouble in the background. So I might do something where there's like have the sky flash or something, and maybe like impose screens or something in the edit. Have him walk, and as he's walking away, he comes across this mysterious woman that kind of comes off as a witch first and asks him where he's going. And then he said, he's like, they don't need me anymore. They cast me out. And then she questions him of saying like, well, are you doing this for the glory, or are you doing this for the good of man, or something like that? And then he tries to strike her down, but she like reveals to be like this beautiful woman. And then he turns around and like runs back into the fray. And so, so with that, I mean, these are all kind of like practice ones for me, like simple enough where I can shoot them on like a very minimal budget or no budget at all.
Right.
And what I would like to do is eventually make movies about the saints, but keep their mythos. So I know, like, so at least within the Catholic world, there's been movies done with the saints before, but they're just highly over historically like accurate biofilms where like they did one called I Am Patrick, and it was just like being like if you want from what I've seen of it, it seems like they just wrote it. It wasn't even a script. It was probably just a textbook, and they just like right. And so what I would like to do, like Saint Patrick has so much mythology into it, where like I think he like touched pagan people, and they would show like their true selves, so they would turn into werewolves and things like that. He at one point turns into a deer to like sneak past pagans to get to some kind of monastery or something. He talks to birds. And so essentially I would like to take like the mythos of these various saints and not be overly concerned with the historical accuracy of it, but just keep the telos of it in there, so that St. Patrick plays off more almost as a Gandalf or Radagast type character, with the difference in like he's doing this for God, like for Christ, right? So like something touched me when Peugeot says in one of it, like no matter how you try, you can't become a Jedi, but you can become a saint. So I would like to create like a mythology that's strong as like Star Wars is, where someone would want to cosplay as Saint Patrick.
That's a wonderful aspiration.
Awesome.
That is a great way of framing it.
Yeah. And I'm a Roman Catholic, and I know, we have a lot of more modern saints and things like that. Like there's Saint Padre Pio and Saint Therese the Little Flower. And even their stories, I'm pretty sure they became saints like after the Enlightenment and everything else that's happened. So they're highly historical. And Padre Pio has some like mythos to it, with it like he biolocated and fought the demons in his spare time and things like that. But it's very it's kind of like shrouded in rationality and things like that instead of like a mythology instead. So it'd be nice at some point to like, I don't know how if it's possible to be forced, but in some way just like create a mythology for them, even though if it wasn't necessarily like historically true.
Well, they already have a mythology. It sounds like you just want to breathe life into it.
Bring it back, yeah.
Am I mistaking something there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's I would just like to crank it up a notch.
Oh yeah.
When you think about it, in the medieval period, they were the original Marvel, the original DC. That's all that people were looking at. That was their stories.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a story of a saint that was a mermaid.
I love that one. Yep.
Really? What?
Tell them that one. That's a good one.
From my understanding, she. I mean, it had something along the lines. She lost. Did she lose a husband or something like that in the ocean? And then she basically, she also had a dog that turned into a sea otter or something like that. And then she wanted to, I honestly don't remember the whole entire story. I just know bits and pieces of it. But eventually there's something where she has a choice. And she decides she wants to return to the waters to be close to, I think, her husband, or I don't remember if it was her husband or the dog, and so it becomes half, a mermaid. But she's an Irish saint. I would have to double check. I think someone posted it recently on the Facebook too.
Something tragic in her life happened where she prayed to the pagan. It was a pagan god.
Like a pagan sea god or something.
Right. And it converted her to half fish, half human, and her dog into an otter.
Yeah.
It's an Irish Catholic saint?
I mean, I think this was before, like, the schism, so I think she's just venerated between both. I think she has veneration both in Catholic and Orthodox. She's such an old saint that I'm pretty sure she's kind of forgotten, at least within the Western world that I'm in, she's kind of like forgotten about a little bit. So if you mention her story, people are like, oh wow, I didn't know that.
Did you notice there's a lot of movies now about saints that coming out, left and right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the one with Shia LaBeouf with Padre Pio. I know a lot of people said it was terrible. Some people also had issue, which I think it's funny because I'm not necessarily a fan of Renaissance art either, but some people got offended because there was nudity in the film. But it's because, within Padre Pio's story, Satan appeared to him as a woman to tempt him. And so they had that scene play out. And I think in one instance, she also, licks an image of Mary or something. So, blasphemes an image of Mary. And so people had issues with it, which is understandable. But at the same time, I'm always like, you guys have we have a Sistine Chapel that's covered in nudity, and you guys have an issue with this. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem, you guys. That you either need to, what's it called? I don't know. In a way, either disavow and banish the Renaissance Sistine Chapel stuff, or you need to or you can't get upset when you see nudity and things like that in your films. But in general, I don't think it was that great. So some people are just, because I know recently Shia LaBeouf is, at least from my understanding, in RCIA converted to Catholicism. So people are saying, as long as he's converted to that movie, then God bless and Godspeed. But in general, I guess the movie wasn't great. I haven't seen it, so I can't speak for that personally. But yeah, there's Padre Pio, I Am Patrick, the St. Patrick film. It came out a while ago. What else was there? There was a third one. I think there's one on TV, so.
They all seem to, as you said, have that maybe disenchanted kind of quality. I haven't seen these films myself, but you seem to be interested in the opposite sort of thing, as you've already said, which is really hagiography, cinematic hagiography. It's much more close to what the big tentpoles are doing than the indie dramas, so to speak. in that sense. With Marvel is the biggest hagiography that we have now. You have a whole pantheon of heroes that people have on their shelves as icons and so forth. So that's the kind of thing that needs to be challenged at that sort of level of storytelling, more so than at the drama, which is just kind of a retelling of their life stripped of mythology, as it were.
Right.
Yeah, I can't imagine anything less interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's like telling the story of like Bruce Wayne's like filing taxes. Like, what are we talking about? Like, here's what Bruce Wayne ate for breakfast. Like,
Yeah.
Have you guys one of the good movies I like with the Saints was Danny Boyle's Millions. Have you seen it? Have you seen that one?
I haven't, unfortunately.
I'll put it on your list. It's a very good one. I'm trying to think of other films that have used the Saints in different ways.
Wait, what?
Millions. Danny Boyle.
Yeah.
Wait, what? I feel like I've seen it. Maybe it's another.
It's like a coming of age comedy.
Where the kid finds a bunch of money.
Yeah. They're
what was that? It was like 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was. That's why it's hard. I'm trying to think of movies with saints. It was real hard to come up with anything.
It's a movie about a saint. I just remember thinking, like, man, if I was that kid.
Well, he gets the money, and his brother's kind of like wants to waste it and spend it, and then the boy's getting visions of the saints, and the saints are telling him to use it for good purposes, and the saints are coming.
Gosh, I want to watch this again.
It's amazing.
This was a Fox Searchlight movie. It's not like an evangelical film, right?
Nope. It's a straight up Hollywood movie.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm gonna revisit this. What was the other one with the kid running? What was it? I remember there's a scene where he's like peeking into the women's locker room in the pool. This is like so vague. I can't remember. Big story.
That is interesting. I mean, that's almost like you could say the early 2000s comedies like, say, Click or like Bruce Almighty, where it's like you kind of give these normal people these larger-than-life powers. And that, of course, nowadays that's framed as, well, they're like superheroes.
Right.
But then it's like, well, maybe the proper frame is, well, they kind of are elevated beyond the status of what they can actually contain. Like
right.
they're not, there's that going up and going down at the same time aspect in that. Yeah.
Wait, I mean, I'm not sure I understand that distinction between the superhero and what you're describing. Can you break that down more for me?
Maybe. I'm just thinking about this now. So I guess what I was saying is maybe this is the way it's more like how the audience understands it in the modern culture, because definitely in the West, saints are they're just, especially in America, which is largely a Protestant country, and it's kind of its story, it's kind of language is very Protestant, like the whole in America, I would say. So it's like we kind of don't know what to do with saints if you're a Protestant. It's like what's this for exactly? Like we just had Jesus, like we're great. We don't need anything else. So that's kind of the Protestant perspective.
Right.
So then when you have a character like Bruce Almighty, and he has powers, there's kind of in a sense a miraculous element to his life that he doesn't fully understand, but all of a sudden he has these kind of responsibilities. It's like, well, that gets framed as, I think in the audience's mind, as more the stories that they're drawing on, the tradition they're drawing on, are literally comic books. They're like these very lower level narratives of superheroes, because they don't have access to the tradition of sainthood as a reference point, perhaps.
Right, and so is that distinction? I mean, at the core of that, is it just the secularization? I mean, I'm trying to.
Probably so.
Because I think I hear what you're saying. It's just basically, it's like, okay, you have this saint-like figure, like you have this figure that gets endowed with heavenly powers, and then there's just like he's still nested in the secular context. So it's not I guess what I'm trying to glean out here is that there's no, I mean, it's just not nested under some transcendent value. Like
right. Yeah, because it's like, that's what, I haven't seen Bruce Almighty since I was a kid, so it's hard for me to like think of all the things. But it's like he, all of a sudden he can do godlike things, but he still has the maturity of a regular person. So he hasn't really ascended the way a true saint ascends.
Right.
Sense,
he has the power of the saints, but he doesn't have the character.
He doesn't have anything to do it. So it's like all of a sudden then that power immediately gets abused. And that follows, but you're right. It's like getting back to what you say, where it's like, well, this is the secular. It's like the spiritual breaking into the secular. It's like, well, boom! All of a sudden, there's this other aspect of life that he had never thought about before that he has access to, and then it's like, okay, well, how does this all fit into the whole picture? And then because he's not nested in a hierarchy, it's like, well, then he's just in this kind of self-serving.
That's pretty good. That's good. I like
how does that movie end? How does that movie end?
Which one?
Bruce Almighty. There must be some redemption. I can't say I remember how it ends.
God gets his power back. He sees his life. He gets hit by the truck, and he ends up in the hospital.
I'm pulling this up on.
At all.
I have to watch it again. I don't remember it.
So he realizes his selfishness. He walks alone on the highway. He gets hit by a truck. Meets God.
He learns, he can't use God's power
to be happy. And then Bruce is resurrected, and
he goes to heaven. Pretty much, he's in heaven. He gets the girl. He gets the job.
And he gets one. Basically, he gets one prayer that gets granted.
He gets a big cookie.
It's a wish, basically. And so, at first, the joke is he wishes for world peace, and God's basically asking, like, what's really on your heart, though?
Right.
And I think he wants his girlfriend back, but the thing is that she has free will, so he can't just, make her fall in love with him. So, I forget what he actually wishes for. Maybe I'll just
his last prayer is that she is happy even without him.
Yeah, that's it. That's beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it is.
That's pretty good. What he really should have wished for is virtue.
Then he gets hit by the truck. But notice in the 2000s, now all the comedies are just naturalistic, like Hangover. Like it's not super, and now they're kind of gone.
Yeah. It's kind of dead as a genre, which is really sad, but I think it's because we don't really have the capacity for moral growth right now as a society. Right. People don't know what they want to grow towards.
We want the jackass. We want the pranksters.
So, I mean, this also ties into, a lot of people will say Groundhog Day is like their favorite comedy, or maybe their favorite movie even. And I think someone in this space has been talking about Groundhog Day recently. I can't remember who.
Oh, I love that. I love that story.
But it's definitely a similar story. It's, he's not a saint, but he's put in purgatory or almost in a monastic state.
But his power is unlimited time.
Well, that's true. Unlimited time.
One day.
In that sense, yeah. Or you could frame it as he in some way has to be. Well, no, I think you're probably right, because he really gets to still live in the world, but it's just he gets to relive his mistakes
that one day.
So you might be able to say that's a purgatory. There's a Dante.
That's true.
Kind of aspect to that as well.
But he learns how to become a music. He learns music. He learns all this stuff.
There was also, I remember seeing there's a connection also because Groundhog's Day is at a similar time as the Feast of the Presentation. I don't remember what the Orthodox version of that is, when Mary presents Christ at the temple to Prophet Simeon. And so there's a connection there too, because the groundhog, it's dependent on if he sees light, it's a shorter winter, and if he doesn't see the light, it's a longer winter. And so there's a similar thing, because I know in Catholicism it's also called Candlemas, or you light candles. So it's like the light is brought into the world and the darkness gets shortened. Like the end of the darkness is coming because the light of the world came in. And so there's like a connection there with Groundhog's Day also, and like the presentation of Christ, and like death coming to an end to some extent.
That's cool. I gotta look into that. I feel like there's a Peugeot video or someone who's talking about this.
There's universal history. with Richard Rowland and Jonathan talking about Groundhog Day, which was
Okay.
I can't say I remember it all, but it was along what Patrick was saying.
Was it about the holiday or the movie?
About the holiday, about Candlemas, and that whole season, as it were.
I think they mentioned something about the movie in it too, though.
Yeah, I think they do. I think so.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the superheroes have become our saints, and then you have like Snyder kind of taking it even to, taking it almost to literal in his movies, trying to make Batman, and he went too hard.
Yeah.
And people that woke people up like, well, wait a minute, they're taking it too serious now.
Yeah, it goes both directions, because at the same time people want to tear it down in that way, and that's kind of, I think, why Marvel has been less successful as of late, is they actually stopped doing the hagiography to some degree. It's like they're always kind of cutting their heroes off at the knees at the same time. Like, they have to be like us at the same time. Right. And and it's like we're at this point where everyone's tired of superheroes, so it's like you also have, like an anti-superhero story like The Boys. I haven't watched that show, but all you have to do is just hear people talk about it to know it's like, there's these people who have superpowers, but they're not heroes. They're not good people. They're just people with extreme powers, and they just abuse them and are just terrible people. And people are like, oh, this is a great show, I love this, And so that's like, that's just because there's a cynicism about the idea of being a superhero. And I think that's kind of, that whole project is running superheroes as a concept dry. So, yeah, I've seen other people say this too, but it's like if James Gunn, is wanting to do a new Superman movie, it's like, well, the thing they have to do is just make Superman super. Like, he has to be awesome. He has to be inspiring to people again. But if they continue along this this line where it's like you're always cutting down your superhero at the same time that you're trying to put them up, which is the same problem as the modern Lucasfilm era kind of Star Wars and Indiana Jones stories, is this you kind of have your hero, but then you're saying, oh, but you're not that great at the same time.
Right.
And conversely, that's why Top Gun Maverick did really well, is they have their hero from the first story, and you've got Maverick, and it's like, okay, well, there's these younger hotshot pilots, but it's like, well, you've already seen Maverick's hero's journey, so he has learned these lessons, and then you're not going to subvert the fact that he's already been on the hero's journey with characters that haven't been on the journey before. And it doesn't matter how virtuous those characters are, you haven't seen that whole journey unfold in any way. So you're like, okay, I don't care that you're cool. These new characters, I don't care that you're cool. I've seen the hero's journey of these other people. I've seen the self-sacrifice. I trust them more, but the movie's telling me I need to trust these new people instead.
Right, right.
It's not what I signed up for. That's what
you're saying. That's what's didn't happen in Top Gun.
No, I'm saying Top Gun's the exception to that.
Right.
And that's why it's so successful with audiences, is because they understood not to subvert Maverick as a hero.
Yeah.
And Maverick is at the top of the hierarchy within the whole framework. Yeah. And they have these different goals and things, but it ends up actually building something bigger than any of their individual personalities. Whereas most of the new stories are all kind of undercutting the accomplishments of the older heroes with characters that you haven't seen and have less connection to.
Right. But the thing, when you hate the hierarchy, when you want to flatten everything out, that's the problem. They don't know how to tell flat stories. They're telling the flat stories. They're rushing everything.
Maybe you could tell a flat story if it's a drama or something, but not when you're trying to do hagiography. Not with Superman. Not with superheroes. When you're doing a larger than life story, which is really almost all tentpole Hollywood movies are that kind of story. They're not the indie dramas that are kind of more in the gray area of life. I have respect for those films and so forth, but they're not what mass audiences go to see. They always go to see the hero films, basically.
Right.
So when the hero films are not making heroes, it's like people are just not there for it.
So you think people are tired of superhero, or just tired of bad superhero stories?
That's actually a really good question.
It is. Yeah.
I think a little bit of both. Speaking from personally, I'm tired of seeing constant different origin stories of Spider-Man or Batman or whatever.
Oh my God!
Me,
Over and over.
I mean, that's why. I mean, you know, it might be almost like a cliche at this point or something, but I do enjoy to a certain extent what A24 is doing, and I don't know if it's because it's the interest of the film themselves, or just the sense of finally seeing something new that's not like a Batman or Spider-Man film. And so, like, I know that there's a lot of satanic elements in their films, like with the Northman and Lamb I saw, and I think The Green Knight too, but they're still interesting. And I mean, one thing I liked about The Green Knight is the visual representation of a poem, because in a strange way it did. There's a strange element to it, but it also still had a bit like a storyline thing. There's certain things I think they could have done away with that didn't need to be there, but in general, I thought it was interesting enough that it was fun to talk about after the fact. But I mean, there's that, like I said, it's just all of it still has kind of like that satanic pattern of either the masculine killing themselves to make way for the feminine, or it's like the Northman is like the perfect. I mean, if pagans ever made films, that's what it would be. It would be the Northman.
Yeah.
It's all about just revenge, and so like that's.
Well, they are making films. There you go.
Yeah,
That's true.
Robert Eggers is very interesting in that way. The Witch, I think, was the most overtly satanic film I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And then, the Lighthouse for me is confusing. I don't know if I have anything to say about the Lighthouse.
That was a crazy one.
Just for clarification, I'm pretty sure the Northman isn't actually A24. I think
It's Apple TV, yeah.
Fox Searchlight, I think.
Or
Maybe Focus Features. I think it might have been Focus Features. But yeah, I mean that was definitely. It was almost in an inverted positive way. I was like, the Northman, like this is a really unlivable movie. It's like, see, like you want things to be like this? It's like there's the Northman that show you what it's like.
But the thing is, it was enjoyable, but at the end you kind of felt empty. Like, okay,
yeah, and I know a lot of people. It's like people who would say, Gladiator is my favorite movie. They're like, I walked out of the Northman, like it's unlivable, and that's a really interesting kind of thing because. You say like, well, it's just physical violence going on, but it's like, no, there's something else that people are intuiting about that story, like a moral emptiness and depravity that's shown on camera, like without a kind of lighthouse to show you, okay, I'm seeing these evil things, but there's going to be a reconciliation of some sort. There's going to be some reason I'm seeing this. Like, you kind of know the movie's telling you you're not going to get a reprieve like that. So people, you sort of think the Northman's going to be an uncle movie, and people that just kind of like a good sword fight are going to get there. But surprisingly, it was like hearing a lot of people like I couldn't watch it. It's like,
I also heard a lot of people said it was slow. So I think there's also an aspect to it that, our attention. Most people's attention spans are so short that if you try to do any type of like slow work, they're already shut off. So unless you within the first 3 seconds, something blow up.
Yeah, look at the new Spider-Man. Look how fast that one is.
Yeah. You know what else the Northman is like? Is a samurai movie. I mean, it's almost like a transplanted samurai film in some way. It's so like a movie like Harikari, or I don't know what its original title, but there's these kind of brutal revenge stories where revenge is the only character of the story.
Yeah.
I don't know. I enjoyed the originals better in that sense. But I don't know if that was said explicitly, but it really, when I saw the film, I was like, yeah, this is a samurai film.
But it's also funny because, like, he wanted revenge, and I think it would have been there would have been some kind of, like, goodness to it if, like, his father was an honorable man. But, like, everyone, even in his own family, like, hated each other. Where you find out through his mom, Nicole Kidman, that she hated him. And hated her own son and hated her father.
Right.
And then there was also an aspect where you don't even know if the father himself loved him either. So then it just becomes not even revenge for the sake of finding justice for your father. It just becomes the revenge for the sake of revenge, and that I've already gotten this far, I'm going to kill him anyway.
Exactly.
I get a lot at this point.
No self-reflection. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with all those things. I think this question of Robert Eggers, I thought about this a lot in general because I was getting back time to listen to The Witch. I kind of was watching The Witch and thinking about what Robert Eggers himself said about the movie, and he was like, it shocked me when the Satanic Temple endorsed the film. And he was like annoyed actually that 8.4 was like
sponsored by Satan.
You know, so that's really interesting if we take this in at face value of saying like I was just trying to make a scary story, a movie that'd be scary for Protestants. I think that's something he said. And it's like,
isn't that the exact project? Like,
yeah, it
how
is.
you get this satanic?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, it is. What it does is it's a spiritual ignorance. It's like you think that you can just do this and it doesn't have any correlation to anything. And that's kind of like the Satanism as gesture kind of idea where it's like, oh, well, it's all just like a joke. We're just kind of doing it for fun. Like, it's not real. But then it's like, even with that spirit, you can embody something that's like, all the Satanists love the movie. And he's like, why do they like it? It's like, you made the movie. Like, how do you quantify that? You know?
Well, that's kind of like that postmodern imagination where nothing is true. All of this we can just play and pick, but you have nothing to ground it in.
Yeah, I always laugh at it because the more atheist you become, the more you play into the religious tropes. And anytime you point it out to them, like, oh no, I didn't do that as a joke. Or like, no, that's not. Like, I used this as an example last time, but the perfect show that does this is Rick and Morty. Like, Rick and Morty tells the more rooted, like, Christian films, and then it kind of notices it for a second, because, like, Rick sometimes at the end starts calling for God, but then it's like, no, we were just kidding. Like, it's not. Like, they have this whole episode where there's these aliens that create fake memories in people, and then they disguise themselves as family members, and so like they feed off like good memories from the family members, but it's like they're basically demons, right? Like they basically do the same thing demons do. Like they feed off pleasant thoughts or whatever, so they can keep flourishing to your own household until like they overtake your whole house. And it's the same story, and it's just like what. Or even a better example, they had an episode where like the devil was selling cursed items, and then Rick was using science to cure them of the curse. But it's just like, well, Rick is he's almost like a priest doing blessings on the thing, where he's like a magician, right? But you try to cloud it with science, but you're playing into that whole thing. I don't know, like sometimes you see these, it's like what you mentioned, the spiritual ignorance, where they like show you the truth of how something like that, tell us of how the world works, and like hint at it, and then they're like, "No, I'm just kidding. It's not."
Yeah. No, that is something that you see really often in this, and I think it kind of typifies the moral confusion of the age. Is there's the nod of the hat towards traditional morality, like they feel they have to kind of balance the scales in some way. It's like someone will be really evil, and then it's like they'll just kind of have a little gesture of goodness, like right at the end of the whole story, like right at the closing moments, just to kind of make you say, like, well, you don't know for sure. Like yes, we doubled down the whole movie on one type of messaging, and then we're going to just give you a little nod at the end of confusion, just to like mix the stew so that you can't quite tell what we're really about. And it's almost like,
right. Do you think it's a self-delusion mechanism? Because like you write the nihilism all the way through, and you will see yourself in it, right?
Yeah.
You have to throw something in, because otherwise your own cynicism is just going to stare back at you. I think.
Yeah.
I'm saying proverbial you as the cynical postmodern writer. Like.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think it's a principalities kind of thing. I don't think people know what they're writing. I think people are just writing in the spirit of the time, as it were, and they're not really quite aware that they're embodying these things. I certainly have friends, other people on their writing journey, like developing as screenwriters, who would say they're believers, and you can kind of point these things out to them and say, like, do you kind of see what you're doing here? And they're like, oh well, I didn't realize I was embodying that, but I can see it now that you say it. But it's like it's like we kind of the whole spirit of the age is like painting itself fractally in some way, and all the artists are just kind of the little they're just giving it body in some way without being aware, and that's just the kind of the spirit of the age in some way, just doing that automatically. Like it doesn't take people having a full awareness of what they're doing. But that's like people can do that because they don't have a kind of higher causality understanding of what they're doing. The delusion for artists of this whole era is that we're all just doing things in a self-expressive way. Like, oh, it's just self-expression. Like it's just me. I'm expressing. It's like, well, why are we all doing the same thing? It's like, why do we make the same errors? Why are our movies failing in the same ways then?
Go on, Patrick.
Well, I was just going to tell you the perfect example of this is that pink banana on the wall, where it's you've like deconstructed it to the like you're saying like because the whole postmodern thing is like nothing matters, everything's like our own, especially in art, like everything's just our own creativity, like it doesn't live within reality, and so like you end up with something like banana cake on the wall. But what's funny is reality kicks in every time. Because at the end of the day, someone, I don't know if you guys read this, but someone ate the banana. And so,
you gotta watch the video. It's hilarious.
Banana is meant to be eaten. And then, like once again, reality plays itself out, and someone eats the banana. So that's like, where's your arbitrariness, Mr. Like, contemporary artist? Like,
I didn't know that. Somebody ate the banana. That's like opposite. That is the like opposition of the Paglia thesis. It's like Logos always wins.
Well, that kid literally inverted the universe, right? He fixed the universe when he ate that banana.
Yeah, they because I'm hungry.
This is something so profound happening.
It is.
It really is. It's huge. One way, the same way, a different way to say the same thing, I think, that I've been thinking about recently is the biggest lie for an artist in this whole frame. The postmodern lie is that the symbols are arbitrary. Like, they can mean whatever you want them to mean.
Right.
And like, the thing that and this is maybe the difference between the Piagetian framework and postmodernism, because I think sometimes when people are new to Piaget, they're like, isn't this just kind of postmodernist? Like, because you're talking about text, and it's like, well, it's like, is it true that it happened, or is it true that it is a story? And there's a sense where it's like, people can really get confused about the difference between what Piaget is doing in postmodernism, especially if they're Protestants kind of coming from that kind of train of thought. It's like hard to see the difference. But the difference, I think, is the insistence that symbols are not arbitrary for Piaget. Like they're maybe teleological. They have identities from the logos, maybe that are named in some way, and maybe man has a role in naming that, like Adam in the garden. But it's like, well, up and down, like there's nothing arbitrary about up and down in symbols, or water, chaos, and potential. Like those things, it's like you can't just say like, well, no, for my story, it's something different. Like you can maybe get a little bit of variation on it, but you can't go that far. And then when that applies to those things, it's like that starts to apply to everything. Another way I've been thinking about this too is saying maybe people are less symbolically ignorant than we think they are. It's just that we don't have access to old symbols. We don't have access to language of creation symbols. When Matthew talks about water being renewing yourself and water being a mirror, like we don't have that relationship because we just have mirrors in the bathroom and we don't make that connection intuitively. But there's a sense that
That's a good example. I was thinking about water, and they're always talking about water coming from below. And my experience, it was weird because I'm like, I always get it from if it rains or the faucet. I didn't understand the concept of water from below, and I realized, that's the ancient way. We're all in our houses, and the water, kind of comes to us through technology.
Yeah, so then we're ignorant of the symbols, as it were. But then it's like, my kind of way, the way I was thinking about it is like, well, we must have symbols in our own time that we understand in the intuitive way that the ancients would understand. understand something like that. And for me, it's like, well, the simplest thing is like, well, what's this? You know, what's me holding my phone and not looking at you? Like, well, that's just distraction. Like, everyone can understand that. Like, it's not something that is really complicated, you know. Or what is a hat? You know, a hat is like taking on a role. It's like you're in a sense cosplaying is something. There's like a lot of things that we actually have in day-to-day life that it's like, oh, actually people just kind of get that. Like, you don't even have to say anything. Or what's someone, you know, watching TV. It's like TV is sedentary. It's a distraction. It's different from the phone though, because it's stationary, completely like that. And it's like people can just watch that in an audience. You see a character sitting down watching television, someone walks in and says hello, and the character like doesn't notice them. It's like, well, you kind of just get what that is. Maybe that's more similar to the way ancients thought about stories than we think. And if people can understand stories that way, then maybe there's hope for the whole symbolic project, as it were.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of it we forget. There's an aspect of participation, because I think we do view ourselves sometimes just as like, we look at the world as if we're like observers from the outside instead of part of it.
Right.
And so that's where I think the disconnect happens between symbolism. So, I mean, like a good example is like you can have, you know, in some stories you can have that the ocean or the sea is death, or like salt water is death, but that's because if you drink it, you die, right? And so, like, if you're living that, right, and like, so if you're in a village that has this pool that no one drinks from, and someone does drink from it and survives, then you like call him the drinker of death, right? And so you have a story that death once visited your village and drank from that pool, and that, you know, it seems obvious, but like down the line, you kind of forget that form of participation, right? Because we have so much, you could say, garments of skin on us that we forget how the world actually works sometimes. And so, you know, with the ancient way of thinking, it's just, I think the key element there is participation. And anytime I mention that, like, so if I connect something like the Mass of Divine Liturgy to brushing your teeth, it boggles someone's mind. But I'm like, it's the same thing, except the Mass and Divine Liturgy is way above brushing your teeth. I was, you know, like showing that it scales, but it's also living within reality. Like, you're not disconnected from religion. You know, it's not some other rules to say.
One thing that comes to mind, Brian, is and it's weird that this has never struck me before, is, are not memes just an emergent symbolic language? Like, a meme is a meme is a self-replicating idea, right? And then the archetype or the symbol is the stable meme across time.
Yeah.
And so, but memes, it's interesting because memes have a participatory aspect. Like, you partake in the meme. And it's interesting because we'll see which memes are limby in the Telebian sense, like which memes are tried and true over time. Because like this is a very new language, but I do think emergent symbology might be happening there. And you can, an interesting thing I noticed, and I don't have social media, I'll glance at TikTok every 6 months, and you can like watch like the memes propagate across languages and countries. Like, you can watch a meme in Japanese and still get it, right? Like,
that's true.
So there's a participatory aspect there, and there are personalities manifesting. Like, the earliest internet memes were literally like characters, right? They were like, there was like Bad Luck Brian, and he was this like like tragic comic character. And like, if you bring up Bad Luck Brian now, it seems like absolutely infantile. Like, I don't think I could like laugh at a Bad Luck Brian now, but it's inhabiting a certain spirit, and then we were drawing together instances, like material instances of how, and fantastic instances of like how that spirit manifests. And so I think memes, I don't know, this seems so like obvious to me now. Like, I don't know if I'm in a bit of drinking the soup, but like
it's like secular icons.
Yeah, one of my favorite meme in this sense, or there's two examples I like. I did it in one of my YouTube videos. I talked about this a little bit, but two examples I like to compare are, say, the Inception as a meme, like the Thingception, you know, a thing within a thing, and then the red pill and the blue pill in the Matrix. like the red pill, blue pill dynamic, and the way people are now like, oh, he's based in red pill, man. Like, like the way that has entered the lexicon is really fascinating to me.
Right.
Because you think about this too. It's like the Matrix has been out for like basically over 20 years now, and blue pill, red pill, like that was kind of around as a meme, like maybe a decade ago, but not really. Like it wasn't the main thing that it was that was a Matrix meme. I mean, in the early 2000s when I was a kid, the meme was just Neo doing like the going backwards. Now no one does that anymore. Like no one cares about that aspect of the Matrix. To your point,
right?
But the thing that has been the most relevant image from the Matrix for people that's lasted is this idea of offering the two hands, and it's like, are you going to opt into the system or are you going to opt out of it? And like,
well, it's the apple, right? It's the apple.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that has been so potent that a movie 20 years ago, it's like, boom, like all of a sudden people care about that meme now, and it's like that was the thing that people could reach and grab as the explainer of their thing that everyone kind of had in their consciousness, but it wasn't, like relevance realization. It didn't bubble to the surface.
That's super interesting.
So it's like the memes that are going to last are the ones that are connected to the ancient symbols.
Yeah. And furthermore, here's what's interesting too. It's like you could say how this is interesting for a filmmaker is like, how does the meme compress the idea of the film? Does it do that successfully? And in the case of The Matrix, I think it does. And getting back to Inception, I think it fails in that case because it's actually literally just like, it's just wrong for what the word is. Like the way people use the meme, like, oh, thingception, like the thing within a thing. It's like, that's not even what Inception means. Inception's about planting an idea. And then the idea that really stuck with the movie of Inception was this nesting doll Matryoshka idea, which is the more interesting idea. I can say that not like that's just what the public decided. The interesting thing about it was this nested levels of reality, and not the word Inception. So it's like it's like Inception means planting an idea, and it's like, no, it doesn't. It means this instead. Like, and it's like so interesting because no one decided that. It's like the way all of Christianity is kind of united in not being that interested in who assembled the canon. It's like, well, that's what was decided, is that these were the canon, and it's like who made the meme. It's like it just was decided, And so there's an interesting way. It's a tradition for sure, which is fascinating.
You said so many interesting things there. I mean, the idea like perhaps a metric of success like for a project is like if some useful meme emerges from it, right? It means you tapped in and compressed and summarized an idea. And just thinking about that, I was like, I wonder how many kids there are now that have never seen The Matrix,
right?
Don't even really have a clue of the narrative structure of the film,
right?
But like can grasp the central idea. Like
from that one meme,
there must be tons of people who like, and Andrew Tate's talking about The Matrix all the time. But like, I actually don't imagine like a lot of 13-year-olds now really watching The Matrix. Like they have way more stimulating things to do. So that's a really interesting idea. And so, I don't know. I don't have the lexicon to talk about this in linguistic terms, but Inception means Russian dolls now. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean incepting an idea. It means nesting realities, and that's emergent and perhaps eminent as well. So that's
crazy, And it's like, how much control over that do you have as a filmmaker? It's like, well, clearly
you don't.
You don't.
Well, you don't.
That's the emergence and emanation. It's like the two things that are meeting each other. You're putting the idea out there. That's the emanation. But then the emergence is like, well, what does the public do with?
How do they make it flesh? Can we? Patrick, are you about to say something?
Well, I just want to ask, what about more kind of like what about the moth meme? Right, so you have this. I don't know if you guys know. It's like a picture of a moth, and usually there's a moth, like the
insect.
Yeah,
and so they have these memes where it's the moth meme, but it's the moth is always thinking about a plant, right? Like they always want light. So like there's the one where there's like the girlfriend who's like, oh yeah, I think he's probably thinking about other girls, and like it's like the moth on the other side. He's just thinking lamp.
Yeah.
Or like there's the car salesman meme where it's like it's the moth, and it's like slaps light again, right? And I think even that one is rooted in something. I think that has to. There's two possibilities there. It's either what we talked about before, the banana, because light, like illuminating something where reality hits you in the face, right? So like the moth hits the light, right, and like hits that thing. But like it's the same thing with the banana, like the lamp hit the light at that moment, like reality kicked it. Or it can be the opposite, because usually what the moth is going for is the moon, and the lights kind of interfere with that. And so it could be something of like misdirected into something where you hit it. But I mean, like you said, there has to be something there too, where people sat there observing a moth at night, like, or like, you know, or the gathering at night, and thinking like, how stupid can you be once you hit that? But then at the same time, we have that experience also with other people, where you see like other people maybe doing some kind of action, and you're almost an observer on the other side of social media, and think, like, how stupid do you have to be to, you know, like, or like a good example is like the what's called Black Friday sales, where you see people trampling each other, right? You're like an observer, and you're like, how stupid do you have to be to like kill yourself so these kids? But then sometimes you might find yourself in that location and do that same thing. But I mean, it's all what's it called? I mean, I'm just wanted to point out also that there might be like, because we were talking about film memes, but then there's really abstract ones like that.
Yeah, the moth is sin, I think. Based on just what you said, the moth is sin. It's like an awareness of sin, right? You know, because it's like the moth.
Right, it's missing the mark. It's missing the mark.
Yeah, and there's a humor about it too. Like there's a kind of self-awareness. It's like, oh, the moth is so dumb, you know, like it flies. But it's like then the whole point of the meme is you put the moth in these other circumstances, and it's like there's the moth doing the thing again. It's like you go out every night and it's like the moth never learned, like, you know, evolution, right? Like why don't the moths that are smart, you know, that don't fly into the light, not die, and then not have kids that it's like they never seem to learn, you know? So it's like I think there's something of a sin awareness and like a humor, like a playing with that in a sense.
You have no idea how profound. You realize how profound what you just said is. Like this cultural meme of a moth is like this condensed. It really is.
It kind of defines the age to a certain extent too. I would say that the world is to some extent defined by addiction. So like the light moths addiction, and that's why you have memes like hits lamp again, or like what is he thinking about? Lamp. Like it's not. It's also emphasis on the sin, but also like the sin. I mean, addiction in itself is like constantly doing that sin because you can't stop because you fed into that passion.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's all right there. But
you're totally right, and it's like it's the two things. It's the sin and it's the self-awareness too. Because like I don't know if you guys know this, but like millennial humor is all just based on self-awareness. Like it's all about like you're you doing the you thing and trying to kind of cosplay as yourself, and that's like the whole source of all the humor. It's like, isn't it so funny that I'm like this adulting and like I feel so fake doing what I'm doing in the world, and that's like that's the whole thing, you know. So there's like a real discomfort with the self that's like at every level of our
it's
society.
kind of a celebration of it too, because sometimes we'll see comments that are like, "That's so me."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's something virtuous about that. So I think that was the new sincerity idea. Like when you have shows like The Office and Parks and Rec, where like everyone's kind of a doofus and like is aware of it, and they're always, you know, they're looking into the camera. You know, Jim Halpert looking at the camera, and then you take that meme, and it's this guy who's kind of like aware of his own goofiness, and there's something virtuous about, you know, acknowledgement of our fallibility, and am I pronouncing that right? And I think what's happening with the Gen Z is and this is a failure of new sincerity as a whole. Like I think what happens with the Gen Z is you you just take that to its ultimate end, right? Like, it's like, I'm fucking up, I'm like, watch me fuck up. Like, watch, like, how far can we take this and just like break it down to its components and until you're literally defined by like, what's happening? I may just be extrapolating endlessly here, which is kind of what I'm accusing the culture of. But it's like you're just breaking yourself down into like subsidiary failures, and until like that's the post irony project is you just like you're just lost in your own in your own fallibility.
Yeah. I think that's maybe one of the key differences from this century and the last century. Is the last century, early 20th century, very violent time. Even the interwar periods, even the artists are big violent artists in a sense, like Dada. It's like they really want to destroy things. It's like this extremism is like at every level of society.
Right.
Now extremism, there's certainly around. Like there's lots of extremism. Not going to have any illusions about that now. But it's still like for the large majority of people, it's like that's just weird. Like you guys are too about what you're about. Especially the Gen Z mind is definitely like I like detachment is a virtue. And disassociation is maybe the word that people would use. Is like I'm disconnected from things, and especially I think in the feminine, like someone like Aubrey Plaza, getting back to Parks and Rec, her character, is like completely, that flat line, like the Billie Eilish, like the kind of the dead eyes kind of thing. It's like that's ideal, like not being committed, not being overly committed to any project.
Right.
So it's like you can't have an extremism to the same degree when that's the dominant mode. Because it's like not all your projects are dumb. Like you guys are all fakers like we are. So like we're not gonna buy into what you're selling in some way.
Right, and it's like we're bound. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of normcore. Normcore was coined by Cable, which was this satirical trend forecasting group in New York. It was like a bunch of postmodern artists, and they like write these. I wouldn't say they were satirical, but they were like cynical trend forecasting genes, and they came up with this term normcore, which was they defined as the celebration of sameness. And so it's like you wear Uniqlo and Nike, and they thought, oh, this was a reaction to the sort of mass indie authenticity culture where everyone had beers and artisanal coffee, and it was a way of us all getting along and being defined by our commonalities. And normcore as a term took off, and then what?
It's breaking up.
Oh, you broke up for a second.
Your mic's on mute.
Yeah, I heard part this side. Am I back?
Yep, much better.
Okay, so normcore, what Cable eventually recognized was like normcore was not a celebration of sameness. It was an escape from a multitude of extreme options, right? Like that's why we all just started wearing Uniqlo. And so to bring it back to what you're saying, it's like the Gen Z thing is we're no longer bound by we're bound by our unboundness. Like we're bound by the fact that we cannot attach to any ideas because there's just this informational surplus of categories and whatever. So you just resign into zombie, right? I mean that's what Aubrey Plaza's thing is I'm a zombie. Like I'm affectless.
Yeah. I want to a book I've been kind of circling around it, and the article I just released today, Moses mentioned it at the beginning, is about this book, Simulacra and Simulation.
Right.
Incidentally, that's the book in the Matrix that
Yes,
Neo
right.
has.
Yeah.
I've been reading that recently, and I got it on the shelf. So, actually, it's not even on the shelf because I was just working on it. I want to read you guys a line from like one of the last chapters here, because it describes this phenomenon like almost perfectly, and it's just shocking to me because it's like this is written in like 1981 or something, and then translated in English in 1994 here. So so he says this is in this last chapter on nihilism, and he says the apocalypse is finished. Today it is the procession of the neutral, of forms of the neutral, and of indifference. I will leave it to be considered whether there can be a romanticism, an aesthetic of the neutral therein. I don't think so. All that remains is fascination for the desert-like and indifferent forms, for the very operation of the system that annihilates us. Now, fascination, in contrast to seduction, which was attached to appearances and to dialectical reason, which was attached to meaning. Okay, sorry, that's like long parenthetical, so it gets lost there. So he says, fascination is the nihilistic passion par excellence. It is the passion proper to the mode of disappearance. We are fascinated by all forms of disappearance and of our disappearance. Melancholic and fascinated, such is our general situation in an era of involuntary transparency.
Wow.
So
when was that written?
1981. It blows my mind. And then you think about, I made the tie to this movie to Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I've heard a lot of Gen Z people say, it's like, man, the scene in the desert with the two rocks. It's like, it just spoke to me so deeply. And it's like desert-like indifference, like fascination with disappearance. Let me just be two rocks in the desert.
Right.
And that's like, it's just like unbelievable, that someone could pick that out in like the 80s. That just,
that's an incredible passage. I'm definitely gonna visit that. The Wachowski brothers or sisters or whatever they are now. Apparently they handed out a copy of the book to every single person on the crew.
They had to read it.
Yeah. My gaffer actually.
I gotta read this.
Yeah. I mean, it's that was kind of for years I just totally dismissed that book until like the last year because of AI and everything, and then everything that the book is about became really obvious to me. But that's why I did the article. Is I break down the first page in the article I did, because the first page alone is like so dense that it'll scare off most people. So I had to do Wikipedia searches and see what he's referencing, even because he mentions the Jorge Luis Borges story, and he doesn't say what story it is. He's just like, oh, in this story this happens. You're like, well, what story?
Right.
Like, I don't know how to.
He assumes everyone has read them.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually remember reading the first page of that book when I was in college, and just making it through like a page and a half, and just tossing it across the room.
Yeah, it's so difficult, but now it's like the parallels to what we have in the moment, and thinking about AI as a principality. It's like it's all in that book. It's like astounding. So I try to bring out some of those details and make it a bit more approachable in the article I did. It ended up covering so many aspects of society. It was way too long for an article, but I had to just kind of get it all out there.
Do you think any of this is also that diversity is held so highly that it needs to be kept sacred, and so the way you keep it sacred is you veil it, and so the veiling is by flattening everything, and so that's where you have the uniform almost being a veil of everybody, so that everyone is androgynous as possible, because diversity is the ideal. Does that make sense? So
there's a lot.
Highest extremes, right? You have these highest extremes, and then the main goal with everything becomes diversity. Diversity is our strength, but then at some point, there's kind of problems that start showing up, and so how do you solve that? You veil everyone's diversity, its differences, so that everyone's the same, and then you flatten out, and then at first it's maybe something like a uniform, but then it keeps going where it's all right, first it's a uniform, and now it's maybe the face, everyone's shaved or whatever. Right. And it goes no one has a name, you're a number.
Or the blue hair.
Yeah. No one has a name, you're just a number, because names can show too much diversity too. It might expose that your identity from a different country or whatever. And so it keeps going, until everyone you living in this black and white world, because even color or memories is dangerous too.
Look, I'm not sure I understand. So I think I follow. We end up with this culture of hyperdiversity, and then you're saying a natural emergent response is to just descend into grayness as a you said as a veiling, or as a making sacred. That's the part I don't.
So when you have the altar, right? You have the iconostasis, it's kind of covered. So you it's a sense of like, you kind of protect it, you separate it from that. But because everybody is, in a sense, everybody becomes an altar, then everyone needs their own like, kind of stasis. And so how do you do that with everybody? You can't have so you just like you kind of flatten it out. I don't know if I mean, when you hold something sacred, so like whatever it is, you cover it up, so only the worthy can view it, right? Like, so even if you have like a family trinket or whatever, like you keep it somewhere so not maybe people can look at it or whatever, but it's not necessarily participated, right? It's hidden. And so the same thing, if you want to sell, because at some point the problem becomes if you celebrate diversity too much, you start having an issue because how, who's, like, even with the transgender movements, then you have like these beings that are like, okay, I'm a man, but I'm feminine, but I dress still as a man. Or is it the what's it called? Or you have like the woman that says she's a man, but still dresses like a woman. And then it starts, everyone's participating, but all these wacky things start happening, like men are becoming pregnant and this is happening, and then you have all these issues of like uncontrolled things. And so you have to flatten it all out in order to keep everyone's uniqueness hidden. Like you have to hold it sacred. I don't know if I feel like it's right.
I think it's just the unveiling of everything. Everything's being ripped. Like the veil is what separates. And I kind of think of it like the devil's almost like a peeping Tom. He wants to see things he's not allowed to see. So he's always going to get people to unveil and break things. The veil, the hierarchy always has to exist. The hierarchy, I think of it like, look at a book. Every word is separated. Every letter is separated from a word. Every word from each other. Every sentence. All those empty spaces, kind of like a veil, building until you get a book. And if you start ripping the veil, it's just a bunch of words. It's just the gray ghoul.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is
interesting idea.
Even with the book, so like you have the thing, you have something that's saying like, don't judge a book by its cover. And so like, how would you prevent somebody from judging a book by its cover? You make all the books the same.
Right.
Yeah.
You make it, like they have different titles. They can have different titles at first, but you just make them all like black leather or something. And maybe at some point people start judging it by the title, and so what do? You just number them, or you give them all the same name.
Well, I think what you're describing is what I was describing with the normcore response. I was
connected with like the diversity aspect too. So you have this whole thing like, let's celebrate it, let's keep it the highest, but then at some point, how do you solve, like, when you keep something sacred, you want to hide it or veil it, and so how do you veil diversity? You make everything the same.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe a different way to look at it is, I'm not really sure they actually like diversity that much. Like, they're not really interested in preserving diverse, separate identities and kind of fostering coexistent identities. It's more like hybridization that they...
Yes, that's a very different thing.
Yeah. So it's like what you need to do, and I think this is like connected to that peeping Tom idea, Moses, which I really like. It's a very fascinating idea of the devil as peeping Tom. But it's like, this idea is like the devil is like eat everything. It's like take every aspect of the world. You can take every aspect of identity into yourself in some way. Like, you can survive that. Like, the promise is that you're going to survive taking every aspect of identity into yourself and not having a specific identity of your own. Like you have to be subsumed somehow into the hybrid in some way. Instead of it's like, a word that's gone from the discussion is like multiculturalism.
Right.
Like no one says that. No one's going and celebrating folk music from different places in the world, like in a really authentic way, where it's like, we want you guys to really like listen to these really awesome African folk songs.
Right.
Like who's I don't see, maybe there are people doing that. I'd be more interested in that than in the total mixing everything together into the modern kind of project in some way.
So, I mean, you said so many things that are profound. So, multiculturalism, you're right. It's like that word doesn't come up anymore. You have intersectionality, you have hybridization, not multiculturalism. And one of the really interesting things, I grew up in Hawaii. Are you Hapa, Brian? Are you Taiwanese? And
yeah, I'm Taiwanese, and then my mom is from Chicago, and she's Polish and Slovenian. But she's the second generation, so she's American.
Yes.
And my dad is first generation Taiwanese.
My dad is a third generation Filipino. My mom's a white lady from Chicago as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So in Hawaii, Hawaii is the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most racially diverse and racially harmonious place in the world in history. Wow. And we always had this joke growing up, like mixed race, master race, because all of my peers were like we use the term hapa, which is technically in Hawaiian means half. And most of my peers were at least 50-50 something. Most of us were like, had a bunch of parts. And then everybody ends up with this mythology, like, oh, like I'm Puerto Rican, Hawaiian, Chinese, like German, Irish. And it's like, no, we don't even have enough time in history. But you end up, so we always use this term hapa, and, I grew up in this environment where you make fun of every race, you make fun of everybody for everything, and nobody takes that shit personally. And then I went to Woke Central University in New York, and it was just this entirely different thing. But I ended up on this email chain. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Ben Bratton. He wrote a book called The Stack. He's a speculative design theorist. He writes a lot about software and sovereignty, and it's very dense lyrical stuff. But he was an advisor at one of the startups I worked at, and he was looking for a word that meant both but neither. And the word hapa immediately came to mind for me. And so when I got to New York, when I got to film school, art school, everybody's like we were still using the term multicultural at that time, but I think what they really meant was intersectionality. And everybody wanted to hear my intersectionality narrative about like I was torn between two worlds, and and it was just so incomprehensible to me. I actually wrote a little essay on it. I'll have to dig up and maybe post somewhere. It was just like a completely different model for looking at my identity. And what I had realized, and I thought I was going to be like a women's studies minor. I was like, study women like for 4 years. It sounds great. I got like half the semester in, and I was like, I can't make up or down of this. And what I realized is the beautiful thing about growing up multicultural or mixed race in Hawaii is you get this flattening, but it's virtuous. I think that Patrick's describing it. It's like everybody sheds their identity. But it's not in some like top down veiling way. It's like your sameness or you're bound to everyone is your mixed nature. Like it's not the parts. It's that the fact that you are diverse here. The fact that you are diverse puts you in the in group. But it's not the component parts of your diversity. Like I have a lot in common. Like Brian and I have something in common, not because Brian's Taiwanese, and like it's not the fact that our moms are both from Chicago that we might have some like overlapping cultural experience, right? It's just the fact that we are unique, dynamic human beings in and of ourselves, and there is a component of mixed race, but it's not the mixing of the specific races themselves. And so I'm trying to draw a line here. This is a tough needle to thread, and I don't claim to have worked this out. But there's a clear difference between this hybridization and true diversity. And
go on. I mean that's like related to denominations as well. It's like how does Christianity preserve? It's like this idea of Jonathan always talks about the unity and multiplicity. Like how do those things exist together? And it's like, well, in the properly constructed hierarchy, the lower identities survive even while participating in the hierarchy. And then the problem is when you have a tyrannical hierarchy destroys all the lower identities, and that seems to be what we're in, and sometimes, unfortunately, even some of our Christian hierarchies, unfortunately, do that too when they're not properly functioning, for sure, is you end up with places where identity is crushed in some way. And then, but it's like, it has to be crushed in order to participate in the whole thing. But it's like you said, when it's functioning properly, it's like, well, look, it's okay that we're different, but like we're actually kind of participating together because it's like, well, we're all kind of different in some way. So the playing field's been leveled in some way.
Yeah. So one thing that comes to mind, it's something like it's a celebration of differentness versus differences. Is that a way of putting it? Like I'm trying to get the language around this. Like it's the quality. Yeah, it's not the state of being different that binds us, or it's not the differences themselves. It's not the component parts. It's the fact of uniqueness.
Okay.
That's
a good way. That's a good way.
Diversity. Like a healthy integrated form of diversity is a celebration of the fact that we are all unique, not a celebration of the ways in which we are unique.
Right.
Does that? I'm not sure. I'm not claiming this.
Does that come back to the image of God then, the uniqueness?
Yeah, I have to think about it some more. I definitely think about, it's like, for me trying to work through this, the thing I've tried to do is just be interested and be genuinely interested in other cultures. And for me, that's kind of manifested musically, really being, I found I'm just interested in like every kind of folk music that you can find. Like whatever kind of traditional music people have that kind of arises from the population, I just seem to be interested in that in any culture in some way. And it's like there's an aspect of like genuine interest in what the culture has to offer. It's like maybe there's an image of Revelation where it's like, the kings all offering the crowns, all offering the fruits of their different nations to so it's like the best things that arise out of each culture, those things get preserved. They don't get destroyed in the process.
Right.
So it's like you have to kind of celebrate the things. You can't like celebrate an abstraction of diversity. You have to actually celebrate. It's like there's this really amazing musical thing that is just cool and we like it. So like we should be able to celebrate it. And you could get me on like a cultural appropriation rant because I think the idea of cultural appropriation just destroys the even ability to do that, to participate in the process of celebrating another culture. Because it's like you, in your ignorance, you're like, wow, this is really cool about this culture. I kind of want to imitate that. And it's like, punish you. Like, you shouldn't try to imitate this culture. It's like, yeah, but that's actually, that process of imitation, it always starts in an infantile way. Like, that's just what imitation is. Like, it always starts at the level of a toddler, and then it gets more sophisticated over time. So it's like, you cut it off because you say it's not sophisticated enough, it's not understanding enough. It's like, well, that's the whole point. Like, that's the whole point of the whole dialogue, is that it gets more sophisticated over time.
Well, you can go even deeper. You can go even deeper with culture appropriation. With you enjoying that other culture, you have no right to enjoy that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That belongs to them.
That's an inversion, and that's why it's like I don't think the people that do this actually like diversity when they say something like that, because it's like, well, you've got to let people try at whatever level they can to participate and to enjoy the things that other cultures offer.
That you just told me what I realized. I was saying the opposite of what I was trying to get at. It's actually a true diversity is the celebration of the actual differences. Like it's the celebration of the cultural products. Like that's true healthy diversity when it's like, oh, like I'm Filipino but I love Japanese food. Right? Like that's a really healthy form of diversity. I think the worked form is actually the celebration of diversity for diversity's sake, with no regard to what that actually means.
Yeah, the content of the diversity is the whole point.
Yeah,
it's like,
and perhaps you need both. Like
you
need
an abstraction so that you can scale it, because sometimes you'll see things that are too hard to understand and grasp at first. So it's like if you don't have an abstraction of diversity, then you won't understand. Oh, okay, wow, this is something I don't understand, but I need to kind of let it exist in this space long enough for me to see what its fruit is. But if you don't have an abstraction, you don't realize that you need to do that. Maybe.
Right. Okay. That's exactly it. So I think what's happening in the postmodern woke thing is you're getting you're just getting too abstracted. Like it's the celebration of the principle of diversity is a worthwhile thing, but like just get completely divorced from what that means. Boots on the ground.
Yeah, it's too high up, and if diversity is too high in the hierarchy, it's like I always laugh when it's like you see a cement truck or a truck on the highway, like a semi trailer, and it's like safety's our number one priority. It's like, no, it's not. Like, your priority's getting the thing where it's going. Like, safety, like, if it's your number one priority, it's like, we need to put it on. It's going underground. Like, no one can touch it. No one can see it. Like, we're going to pour cement over the whole thing. Like, that safety's our number one priority. It's like, it's not. Like, it isn't. So, it's like, where is it on the hierarchy then? Like, it's important. You know, this stuff has to arrive where it's going. Maybe it's the number 2 priority. You know, it has to travel. That's the number 1 priority. Right, get your thing to the destination. You know, so the same thing you could say about diversity, probably. It's like it's obviously important, and it's obviously a big factor in what we have to deal with in a globalized world. But is it the number 1 thing? It's like, well, no. The number 1 thing is whatever the number 1 thing is of that organization is. It's like, is diversity the primary thing of the film? It's like, no, making the film is. And then diversity is going to play a role in making that film good and relevant to people. But it's not the number 1 thing. And it's like some people they want to hang you if you just say that. So that's the problem.
I think there's also a form of proper integration of it too. So I have a different experience of being, I guess, so both my parents are Polish, but I was born here in the U.S. And so like I'm first generation here. But so I grew up here in the U.S., but I was raised by my parents as if I was born in Poland. So now my issue is that I have what I kind of call like split culturality disorder, where I don't necessarily know where I completely belong. Because if I visit my family in Poland and go there, there's still half of me that is not completely integrated there. Like I love it and the thing, but then I kind of yearn for the United States. And then when I'm here in the US, I have the same problem where I kind of miss being there. And so I have this kind of sometimes struggle of like, where do I actually belong and what identity do I necessarily associate with? And so I think I think there's also of celebrating cultures of like properly integrating or like properly participating in those cultures. Because then also like if there's a tropical place that has, let's say, celebration with mangoes, right? Like you interact with that festival in a particular way because maybe there's a mango season in that place. But then if you try to celebrate that same thing maybe in like Michigan, it might not work as well. You're like importing the mangoes to the celebration, but it doesn't have the same necessarily effect or proper, I guess, reverence for the festival because the mangoes don't grow there; they're like imported into there.
Right.
So maybe you can do a similar festival, but whatever grows natively in, let's say, Michigan. So I agree with what you guys said about cultural appropriation and all the other stuff, but I think there is an element of also, integrating and participating with it in the right way. Because, like, for my example, like, I didn't properly participate, let's say, maybe in the United States because my parents raised me as if I was in Poland. And I'm not blaming them necessarily for that, but, like, I wasn't completely, let's say, integrated then in the U.S., right? I was, like, partially integrated.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. You know, it's like there's a limit to how much you can embody other traditions. Like, and this is probably definitely connected to, I think, a lot of our modern problems is we're way too disconnected from our geography. You know, because it's like the whole world is, you know, we live in a digital world, and then it's like, again, to borrow Baudrillard language, it's like it's the real that rots, and the map is the thing that the map precedes the territory. And it's like literally now it's like if you go anywhere you have your Google Maps, it's like the map sees the territory, and then you know there's little vestiges of reality that you kind of interact with, but it's only like through the medium of technology that you interact with the real. Very cynical Baudrillard view if you take it to the full extent, and I don't like going full Baudrillard, but it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah,
but
it's like example of that is Las Vegas. Like you have all these landmarks that are supposedly from all these different countries, but they don't mean anything. And At the same time, it's like in the middle of the desert, so it's almost like the city itself is a mirage of all these other things. It's like
Yeah. So that's clearly like a really improper embodiment of something else. Like it's a pastiche. Like it just doesn't work in any proper way. And yeah, maybe in the proper sense, it's like, well, cultural appropriation, like the better word, is cultural dialogue or cultural dialogos. Where it's like you get increasing layers of sophistication as cultures develop over time together. And it's like it starts at just the lowest form of cultures talking to each other is jokes. It's just kind of making fun of the other side, pointing out the differences in humor.
Back to memes.
Breaking up the differences.
Yeah, and it's like in a way, it's like it's always like the thing I'm saying to my friends is like it's the joke that reveals the truth. Like that's the joke is the thing that you can't say with a straight face, but it's like people will, and now for millennials that's true when their jokes are about themselves. It's like they'll make the joke about like, oh, it'd be funny if it was, if I was like this, and then it's like, well, you just said you just revealed something there, like there's and it's like obviously there's limitations to that in practice, but it's like there's this aspect of two cultures that are different from each other, and you're kind of noticing the ways that they're different, and it's like that manifests negatively sometimes in these jokes. But then you can that's like just the lowest level of the hierarchy. It's like, well, you're going to start there, but you're going to get past that. Hopefully, if things don't prevent that. And as we've seen historically, things can prevent that. Like there can be, the emergence and emanation. Like there can be forces and governments, kind of things like that really make it much harder for cultures to properly integrate. I think that's definitely like the case in the American South. Like with Reconstruction really being a botched kind of effort, it's like. It's reasonable to say that it could have gone a different way if there was a different emanation from leadership, perhaps. But it's a dialogue, and the dialogue has to happen. Like it has to develop over time. And there's actually things that our culture does share that we just kind of don't seem to care about or notice, at least the people who are super negative on how our society is doing in that way.
There's something that's such a great point that it can start with jokes. Like there's something to be said for this notion, like, well, at least they're making fun of each other. Like it's like there's a mutual recognition there.
Yeah, it's communication. Like it's I noticed something about you,
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be negative, and I think that's maybe what people miss is it's like it's always negative the way it's framed for for the so-called woke people, or for whatever we're gonna call that project, at the moment. It's like that is it's always a negative thing. It can't ever manifest in a positive way.
Right. They don't have a sense of humor.
Yeah. I think the Asian half of me appreciates Asian jokes. Like I kind of laugh at that because it embodies some of my experience. When a lot of the stereotypical Asian jokes do with unreasonable expectations of your parents and everything. And you hear that and you kind of laugh about it. You're like, oh yeah, there's actually a part of me that recognizes that that's part of what I experienced in some way. And it doesn't mean it's the whole picture at all, of course. But it's like, okay, like it can exist at the right level if it's not taken too far. And obviously, people do take it too far sometimes. But like it's all just it's part of the experience,
So I forget who said it. I think Socrates. I don't know. Is it Socrates? Like humor is the intersection of the obscene and the holy, and in the postmodern ontology, there is no holy. But like you can't have humor. Like there's a point processing going on in the joke. I think. Right?
Great way to say it.
And if you eliminate. Right, that's the postmodern thing, is the blending of high-low, and we get all sorts of great things out of that. Like, the priest who swears, like, there's something beautiful and fun about that, but, well, funny, actually. That is the blending, like, the proper blending of high-low is humor.
Right.
Like, that's actually the proper blending of high-low. What the postmodern project does is, like, the disintegration of high-low. And so you literally can't have humor when you don't have that which is above and that which is below. Right?
Yeah.
Either that or you take what's below and make it holy. So like if part of it, maybe we can laugh at each other too, because though it's part of our identity, most of our identity is maybe held into a highest ideal, right? And so, like, if your highest ideal is, for example, your Polishness or your Germanness or your Chineseness, and someone makes fun of that, it could maybe then, then someone's walking into the Holy of Holies, like that's becoming kind of Holy of Holies. And so that's why you can joke about it. Whereas, if you have the hierarchy properly ordered where you're God on top, right, and then your culture, you don't have so much, you can say, like chips in that spot. So there's an aspect of it that you can make fun of it because the holiness is in God.
Yeah, the other side is everything's funny.
Yeah,
If you
and
break
that's
it.
like the I don't know if any of you guys listened to the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling.
That was fantastic.
But like they do a good job of bringing out that dichotomy on the internet of say 4chan versus Tumblr, and it's like those are those two sides of it. One side is everything's funny, and then the other side is like nothing's funny, and everything's like the self, like worship of the sacred self in some way, And then the other is like nothing's sacred. Like we'll tear everything down, and it's like you've got these extreme identities that are just a powder keg in the culture, as it were.
So, is there? I mean, I wanted to ask this earlier. Is there any difference? Is worship of the self? Is there any difference from devil worship? Like, is that not the same thing?
It is. Yeah, no, I think it's the same. I believe it's the same thing. I mean, that's the perfect. So, I mean, the shape of the triangle for a heart key is perfect because it's like it draws multiplicity up to a unity, whereas the worship of self takes like multiplicity and everything and drags it down to you. And so then, it's not possible, or you can even say takes everything down, puts it to multiplicity. And so like, then you have every single individual living within their own reality, and you have to interact with it. Like, there's no commonality. There's no way to be a community, right? So like, so devil worship would be like two people participated, but they each have to live within each other's fantasies while not offending themselves, if that makes sense. Right?
Okay, that's a really interesting thing. Wait, hold on a second.
So yeah, in my world, I'm a queen of France, and what's it called? Cake is healthy. But in the other person's world, like they have something else. But so I have someone that participates with me has to play my game, even though it's not true. But there's no way to actually build a real relationship. It just becomes how, like, the other person has to worship me and I have to worship them, instead of us worshiping together.
Right. There's no principality holding it together. But I would say, like, worshiping the devil and worshiping yourself, both of them are just worshiping yourself. Because the devil, like, you're not really worshiping the devil. You're worshiping. If you worship the devil, you're just worshiping yourself. Because you're both participating in that realm of just worshiping yourself. Eventually, both of you are going to be extinguished. Like.
I think when you're worshiping yourself, I mean, when you're worshiping yourself, you're actually worshiping the principality of the devil. Right? Is that like? I don't think you can like. When you're right, like when you're worshiping the devil, you're worshiping yourself. But when you're worshiping the devil, at least you know that's what you're doing.
Right. But I mean, eventually it's going to end in the same place because you're both going to end up, the devil keeps coming down, and, he's going to end, you're both going to end up in hell.
Right, and you keep supplanting, like, that's that Montero video, right? It's like you come down and you beat the Baphomet, and then, like, some other narcissist is going to come down and kick your ass, too.
Exactly.
And so it's just this constant descent. So, I mean, I asked that initial question basically because there's, like, this edgy adolescent agitator in me that kind of just wants to say, like, it's symbolically, and if symbolically, fundamentally true that we live in a culture of devil worship, right? Like,
I think that tracks. Yeah, I think isn't the kind of Satanist version of the golden rule something like, do what you will, just don't harm others in the process, or something like that. It's like this kind of conditional sort of statement, or maybe the shorter version is just do what you will.
Well, I think it's a do what you will without harming others.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that is
You can't.
you can't.
Right.
But like, there's something virtuous, not virtuous, but like, you can see, I mean, that idea appealed to me. Like, I would have identified as a Satanist for 4 months between the ages of like 14 and 15. And like, it does make some fundamental sense, right? It's like, oh, like, I honor my desire, and like,
the limit on my desire is hurting other people. Like that's it's like, when I've heard that, I was like, it's so sophisticated. Like, you can always almost recognize the devil because it's a very sophisticated sort of move. It's like a level smarter than you're expecting it to be. And it's like that kind of half truth, you know, that's always like it's like, oh, but there's something there, you know, you could see why that would make sense to someone. And then it's like, yeah, but this is also the way to hell. Like, you know.
I think about the whole, I grew up in a very like libertarian pro free market household, and I won't get into I have very fringe political views, but like this notion of like, you know, individual rights, and you know, as long as you're not infringing on anybody else, it like you get the appeal to that.
Yeah.
How the hell do you do that though, right?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough time to be an American. You know, I think everyone's asking those questions from different perspectives, you know, and obviously people more of one political leaning are feeling the appeal to socialism because of kind of seeing the inherent contradictions. Right. And then others, you know, probably more close to us are finally feeling it kind of pulled to traditionalism of like, you kind of, either way, it's like you can't have like this hierarchy of self-service to money, you know, as the goal. Obviously, I think you could say the problem with the socialist way is like you end up with this other kind of hierarchy that's a totalizing system in a different manner that you think you can control, but you actually won't. Like, it's actually going to end up serving someone else's identity. That seems to be what happens to every socialism, is a powerful person kind of takes over because there's like this vacuum where it's like, well, we're all going to have a social identity. Right. It's like that can actually work when you have a cohesive society at like the level of a neighborhood, like a very small, like Mayflower compact size. It can work within a certain season, but then you try to scale that for everything, and it's like something very powerful is going to take over that as soon as you try to flatten everything that much. So like there's a problem there. And then, going the other direction, it's like, well, maybe I think the place for someone on the right, the fear is like, okay, we do that, but then we just get killed. Like everything destroys us, you know, because the world will move so fast. And this is like the whole atom bomb problem. It's the AI problem. It's like, okay, we see this as evil, but we think that we're the best people, so we have to be the ones that shepherd it into existence. Instead of saying, like, we opt out, you know? Right. Like, there's definitely this kind of pull now of in some way, the extreme embodiment is the Amish, you know, or the Tolkienian, like the Hobbiton, as the thing to do. Like, you need to step out of the whole structure of the political system. You need to step out of the hustle. You need to step out of the capitalist frame of, like, optimizing for wealth as the main goal in life, optimizing for efficiency to produce more product. Like you brand as identity, you know, that's like everyone's kind of over that, you know, in some way. And then it's just figuring out where we go now. And it's like, the trouble is, it's like that whole thing it's going in like so many different directions. Like no one knows how to say what it should go towards.
I don't know if you guys listened to the most recent Peterson. It was with this guy. He's like a comic, and he has a PhD in Renaissance poetry. But one of the central suggestions, he's like, you have to tie the whole woke principality, like left right, like it has to be divorced from left right language. Like it's you have to actually divorce it from politics entirely. Yeah. I don't know how exactly that's relevant to what you were saying, but it immediately came to mind. Is like you're no longer dealing with a political entity, like working on a binary dualistic spectrum. Like you're working with a principality. So I guess that is to say that the framing of the question isn't like whether we go left or right. Like,
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Like that neither way is the way forward, which is
Right.
is like the thing that I feel like all of us probably within our own respective circles are like trying to shape the people that are whichever way they're going. It's like, look, neither of these extremes is going to survive. Really,
I think that's going to be our issue because the kingdom of God is not right or left. You
Well,
can
yeah,
see it, you see it transcend, and you can see maybe the woke transcending in the opposite way.
yeah.
And then
That's beautifully said. I mean, it sounds kind of trite, but it's like the way is not left or right. It's up, and the woke's trying to go down.
Yeah, you have to pick.
Well,
I think we're all forced now. Everyone's being forced to pick heaven or hell. It's amazing.
I mean, that's true in the sense that you one could be, I think, more favorable to the project if you had a sense of where it really wanted to go. If it was like, yeah, this is the goal. Like, here's the city that we're aiming for. Like, let's describe the ideal city for you and what life is like. But no one seems to be able to do that. The ideal seems to be non-existence.
Right.
It's like the antinatalism.
Because if it's the self, it's multiple
like,
hundreds of selves deciding the vision. You can't decide a vision if you're each going to determine the vision.
Yeah, and it seems to trend towards non-existence and separation.
Right.
It's like the cultures you can't have a dialogue. You need to be subservient instead to what? Like, who knows what? But then it's like, okay, well, the humans we're going to destroy the planet, so we need to not exist. Like, there's that Malthusian, like, we have to
transhumanism. That's the whole transhumanism. That's what it's leading to. Destroy our bodies, destroy ourselves. Let the machines take over. They'll do better.
Yeah, well, that's like the ghost of materialism. I think is the transhumanist. It's like, well, we're gonna solve all these spiritual problems with the material still. Like, don't give up on the material yet. Like, we're gonna win. We're gonna solve this mortality problem. It's like that's kind of what that seems to be.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, there's an aspect that back, like the original pagans, for example, at least had a notion and understood that there was a principality behind certain things they did.
Right.
That's why you have Thor and like different gods. And so there was like a certain reverence to it. And so like there was an understanding like this thing needs to eat. So like in paganism, there was like a sacrifice. Whereas now, this new form of paganism, or like we are talking earlier about Satanism, is like there is no reverence to it. So it's almost like the beast is completely unchained now.
There you go. Ooh, that's good.
It wants to eat everybody. So like building its body, like you guys were just saying, so that it can just swallow the world. Either that, or sometimes you have even like, you go to some of these parties or like EDM concerts or something, and if it was a pagan festival, at the end what we would have is probably a sacrifice, where now you have someone dying of overdose, in that like the beast just randomly picks people out and eats them, like he's unchained in that sense. So I feel like that's a kind of like a difference too, because at least the ancient pagans, like you could say, had the dragon chained up and fed it.
Yep.
Whereas now we've through our ignorance, we have chained
symbol.
it, and now it's just flying around eating anybody it wants.
That's why the ultimate symbol of our age is the zombie. It's just consuming.
Yeah. What you just said about the human sacrifice at the Electric Daisy Carnival, like that's really profound. And one thing Jung, I think it was Jung, said, the gods don't demand worship, they demand acknowledgement. And I think that goes back to this idea of the Sabbath day, or accounting for the fringe. Like, you don't want to feed the fringe, and you don't want to eliminate it either. Right. You just need to acknowledge and give it its space. And if you because what's happening is we're inviting these pagan entities in, and we're either giving them the buffet of ourselves, or we're not really naming what they are at all. So what you get is just this, like, you get the untamed, undomesticated beast. And I think you're right on the money with that. And another just concrete example of this, I don't know if you guys saw that Travis Scott concert where all those people were crushed.
Yeah, the whole building, something, a lot of people died. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it was just this crowd crush where there were way too many people and everyone, was fucked up and there wasn't enough water. It was really interesting because when I watched the videos, and they have these amazingly morbid compilations on YouTube of cell phone video, and you see these people, there's this literal satanic den on stage, and Travis Scott is up there, and I unfortunately I listened to all this, awfully barbaric music and get off on it a little bit, but he's talking about like peace and love, and there's all this satanic imagery and fire, and you have these people in this pagan ritual screaming, like literally screaming to their deaths. And I remember watching this and just being morbidly fixated. At the time I was dating this girl, and she was like, so you see that and you don't think like there's devil worship, like there's not an Illuminati devil worship like happening at the top of the music industry? And I was like, I get what you're saying, but like, stop it. And in the past 6 months I've been like, no, like she's tapping into something. She's tapping into the principality. Like she's thinking symbolically. I want to go back to her. Things didn't work out. I want to be like, what you said was so profound and correct, and I'm sorry for scoffing at you. But yeah, I mean, the beast is unhinged. I didn't think about that until just now. But
or you have musicians up there calling for the death of children, right? Like with the whole abortion thing. Like there's so many artists now that come out at Bonnaroo or whatever, and they're like, my body, my choice. Let's call for the death of children, kind of thing. And it's
God. It's so on the money. It's so.
Yeah, that's the other funny thing is that like we're extremely returning to like the medieval world to a sense, and people sometimes still brag like, I don't want to go back. It's like you already are back, right? Like you already live in that world. You have witches on social media like offering crystals and visions and things like that, and you're saying like, what's it called? Like, it's 2023. Like that doesn't mean anything. Like when people say that, I mean, like, and then it like still laugh at the ancients. We're like, oh, we're gonna go back to witch burnings and stuff. It's like, well, that's just the way the world is.
All right, gentlemen, we're at the 3-hour mark. It was a fantastic conversation.
Yeah,
we definitely got to do it again.
Please, I feel so nourished. Really, like I have to express how much I've been like pining for this sort of interaction for years now. So I'm very grateful. Thank you for facilitating.
Awesome. Go around if you have anything to plug or promote. Go for it. Go ahead, Adam.
I don't actually have anything to plug or promote now. I'm trying to remain in the cosmogonic waters before I. I'm sure I've said things that have already gotten me canceled, but no, I don't have anything to promote. But I think if I do want to promote anything, there's actually not a surplus, but there's enough community out there for this type of conversation that I think it's dying to be had. So
absolutely,
between the Symbolic World circle group or whatever you call it, and the Vanderclay Discord and all this stuff, if anyone's watching this or there's a lot of connections to be made, and I wish I did it 5 years ago. So that's what I have to promote.
Awesome. Patrick?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a podcast where I talk a little bit about this stuff in my own way. It's called Holy Seven, VII Roman numerals. And and then I try to have conversations with other people and kind of pick their brain in a symbolic way too, that do apologetics and things like that also. So I hope to release more short films to play around with that. So.
All right. Brian?
That's cool. I just have my YouTube channel, which has a lot of my short films if people are interested. And then some of the kind of more essay format things where I talk about some of the film culture last year. I'll probably do a couple more at the latter half of this year when things slow down a bit. And then I've got a little Substack as well, Lucid Themes. So I'll make sure to send all the links to Moses so that can get around. But otherwise I have been working on a feature film that I'm hoping to have released at some point, but it's probably hard to say too much about that at this point.
Right.
But maybe in the future.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Thank you, guys. You have a good night, good weekend. See you later.
Okay. Yeah.
You too.
See you
All
guys.
right. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.